everyone. I said good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
What a beautiful day, right? I love this location. Okay, so welcome to our Mental Health Forum. Most of you know me, some of you don't. I'm Talia Lane, Director of Marketing and Business Initiatives at Mathis Financial Group, and I am also the 2022 President of the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade. I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled you're all here. It has been a while since we've been able to come together in person to discuss such an important topic. More important than ever before, as many of you are still grappling with the impact that COVID-19 has had on all aspects of your business. So today, we are here to shed some light, and our distinguished panel of speakers will provide some guidance and tools to help you and your employees. It is with honor that I begin today's meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas. More specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island, First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is, and will continue to be, home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support, truth, and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. So let us keep these principles close as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. All right, so before we begin, I have to recognize some awesome people who have made today possible. Our presenting sponsors, Bell Canada and OLG. And joining us today from OLG are Senior Municipal Relations Manager, Kathleen Devine, and Senior Director, Rewards, Wellness, HR Systems, and Reporting, Kristen Warden. From our event sponsors, 369 Global Inc., Chief Strategy Officer, I'm totally going to butcher your name even though you told me how to say it, Kumaran Nadesan.
Ew, you did good.
Yes. And from 360 Connect Business Development Manager, Claude Flint. And our beautiful centerpieces today were sponsored by Express Employment Professionals, a group of annual sponsors that support the ongoing work that the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade does. Please allow me to thank our premier sponsors, Bell Canada, Boyer Auto Group, Durham Live, Alexicon, Hubble Canada, McGovern Hurley, OLG, OPG, Safran, TD Bank, UPAC, and our newest premier sponsor, 369 Global Inc. We are also grateful for the support from Casino Ajax, Pickering Casino Resort, the City of Pickering, the Town of Ajax, Durham College, and Trent University at Durham. So thank you all. Just a few more things to get through here and then we can actually get the ball rolling, guys. Just bear with me. Okay, so since 1955, the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade has served as the voice of business in our community through our pillars of driving success, advocacy, and community. Driving success includes the commitment to provide tools and opportunities that empower business to learn, to grow, and succeed, and that is the reason that we are here today. If you are already an APBOT member, thank you for contributing your voice to our network today. And if you are not a member, we welcome the opportunity to share the importance of our organization. Okay, now to the good stuff. Let's begin. I am pleased to introduce from OLG, Kristen Warden. She is, as I said, the Senior Director of Rewards, Wellness, HR Systems, and Reporting.
Out in song. Save you all from that. Thank you so much, Talia, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our event today. It gives me great pleasure to be a presenting sponsor alongside Bell Canada today. Unfortunately, representatives from Bell Canada are unable to join us due to some pre-scheduled planning meetings that they had scheduled for today. And so, of course, we wish them great success on their day. I'm very pleased to be part of today's event. One of the areas that I lead at OLG is employee well-being strategy and the programs that go with that strategy. And so, you know, I will add, I'm certainly not an expert in this space, but I do routinely hear from our employees and their leaders about how their priorities have certainly changed since the pandemic. And, even the broader conversation around mental health and how that has certainly changed in the 2+ years. And so, providing support to our employees and their leaders to achieve good mental health is really a core tenet, I think, of business in general, because behind every layer of our operation is an employee, right? And so there's somebody there who provides that skill, that experience, and the expertise that let our businesses achieve success. And because that person is there, they're an employee to you, we know that we have to look at the whole person, right? When we talk about well-being. So if someone's not well at home, they're unlikely to be well at work. And so it's understanding that your employee comes to work for you, but they could also be a parent, they could be a spouse, they could be someone's aunt, someone's child. And so, at OLG, as part of our well-being strategy, we take a look at the whole person. And so we focus on what we can help folks with, whether they're at work or not, to help improve their mental well-being. Many of our organizations certainly offer well-being programs or benefits, such as employee assistance programs or enhanced mental health group benefits coverage. And we do that in an effort to help our employees embrace a healthier them. But as we know, many businesses throughout the pandemic have certainly struggled. Many employees have struggled, and I think folks are still struggling in many ways. So the conversations like the ones we're going to have today, I think, are really quite important because it helps us understand others' lived experiences. And I think that really helps us then to appreciate how we can help support our employees better. So today our aim is to help your employees get back on track. And so I'm so very proud of our program today that brings together experts who will share programs and services that are available in the Durham region, close to home, close to family, and where we do business. Today's forum is being filmed by Aspen Films and will be posted on the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade YouTube channel, where you'll be able to share the link with your colleagues, employees, and your broader network. We've also provided you with a QR code that will enable you to download all of the presentations that you see here today so that you can easily reference or share them. Thank you to all of the presenters for sharing their material. If you do not happen to have a QR code, please let Jessica or Chris know, and they can email the presentations to you. Okay, so now for the main event. So I'm very pleased to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Onika Dainty. Onika is a Bell Let's Talk mental health ambassador who also works at the Recovery College Wellness Center as a peer support specialist for the Canadian Mental Health Association of Durham. Onika's mental health journey precedes COVID-19, but her experience through the pandemic has become all too familiar, especially for healthcare workers. At the start of the pandemic, Onika was working with COVID-19 patients at a major Toronto hospital. As critical case numbers grew, Onika's role was reduced and she was soon laid off. Devastated from losing a job she loved, she focused on managing her mental health, ultimately finding new employment with CMHA Durham. Onika is here to share what she did to thrive in uncertain times. So please join me in welcoming Onika to the podium. Freestyle with the mic, or would you like me to?
I might drop it. Mic drop.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Onika Dainty. I'm nervous. I'm gonna just say that right off the bat. But we'll get into it. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. So I love hiking. That's something you need to know about me. It's very important. I love hiking. I started in 2019 with a friend of mine from a former job. Now a very good friend of mine. We started hiking and it was just transformative. It was important to my mental health to be out in nature. It was just a new self-care tool in my toolkit. I felt grounded, I felt great. I'm a Capricorn, I'm an earth sign, I loved it. So, our first hike of the season for myself and my cousin, who I started taking with me, her name is Onika, I guess, Onika and Kanika, it's very funny. She was named after me. So on May 21st, 2022, we went on a hike to Seton Trail here in Pickering. Yay. Does anyone remember what happened May 21st, 2022? The tornado. The tornado. So we went on a 3-hour hike. Met some very interesting people. One to note is a gentleman named Barry who tried to mansplain to me that I was hiking incorrectly, and also how to cure my bipolar. Veganism, by the way. That's what it is. That's the cure. So we'll get back to Barry though. So we were on our way back. We got the 3 hours in. We were on our way back. We got the alert that there was a storm coming, and we were about an hour out of actually getting out of the hike. So my anxiety response, I discovered, was freeze, flee, and then fights. Kanika's was not. Hers was just fights. So I actually started to run as the rain came and the storm was whirling around me, and I almost got hit by a falling tree. Kanika saved me because she's my homegirl, so she saved my life, and I huddled beside her under a tree because we didn't know what to do. So, and in that moment, I thought to myself, I am so scared. I feel so uncertain. I feel so much anxiety. I don't know what's gonna happen next, if we're gonna live or if we're gonna die in this forest, huddled next to this tree, and it took me back to another moment. March 13th, 2020. Just another day, it seemed like. I was walking to work. I was working for a major Toronto hospital at their recovery college. I was a peer support specialist. I loved my job. With my bipolar, it was important for me to have a routine, which I did have, my self-care routine. I exercised regularly. I walked to work. I ate healthy. I hiked. I was finally experiencing what mental illness felt like with mental health at the same time, having some period of wellness and health after 6 years of not being in my manic storm. So I walked to work that day, and around 11 o'clock, I got a text message from my cousin Julian. I have lots of cousins, so they're involved in the story. So my cousin Julian hadn't spoken to me in a couple months. We fight a lot. So, but the message said, "Leave work now. The country is shutting down. Go to the grocery store. Go home." And I'm like, what? I was like, and Julian is if there's one thing you need to know about my cousin Julian, he's a very serious young man. He's my little brother, and he would protect me no matter what fight or argument we were in. So I knew this was real. And again, I had no idea. I'd heard of COVID. I'd heard rumors about COVID, but I had no clue. And I also had $23 in my bank account, so I'm not sure what grocery store I was getting to buy those groceries, because pay wasn't coming for another week. But that day was here, and 2 o'clock that afternoon, Justin Trudeau came on stage and said the country was shutting down and we needed to just basically go home and stay there until I don't know, the next word we got, I guess. Nobody knew. I promptly had a panic attack at work. My colleagues had to take me to the grocery store, buy groceries for me. I Ubered home, and I sat there and I waited. We were to be redeployed to the main area of the hospital at some point, and we were told that we would be working closely with COVID patients. I had no experience in this area. I was a peer support specialist. My job was to share my lived experience. I had no experience with the pandemic, so I didn't know what to do or where to go or where to turn to. But there was a month during the pandemic, this would have been May, by this time, where I ended up working with COVID patients. I took them to get their dialysis done in the hospital. That was a very challenging situation. I was under a lot of mental strain. My services had been cut off, so I had no access to my psychiatrist, my social worker, my ACT team, which is an assertive community treatment team that had been taking care of my mental health with such support and care for 6 years. So this is March, April, May, June, July was the first time I saw my doctor. So by that time, I had been isolated, I had been stressed, I'd worked with COVID patients, I had lost my job because eventually the college had to shut down that I was working at, the recovery college. The funding had to go towards COVID, of course, and I was in a state of hypomania. And if anyone has any knowledge about bipolar and hypomania, that's like the first step to falling off. So I was experiencing hypomania, rapid speech, racing thoughts, everything that you can imagine. It was tough. It was tough, but I made sure I took my meds. I made sure I stayed as connected with my family as possible. But I knew just the environment that I was living in. I was in downtown Toronto in a very bad neighborhood where they did not care about COVID. And I realized this was not the environment for me. So that was number one thing I had to do. I had to get out. And I had to go back to what I knew, which was family and friends. So I moved back to the Durham region. And I started to kind of slowly put things back together. It was tough. My parents were seeing me in hypomania, which was challenging for them. They'd experienced 7 manic episodes and a year and a half of my life in psychiatric institutions prior to that. So they were nervous. They didn't know that over the course of the last 6 years, in preparation for moments like this, I had done all the work. I had done the talk therapy, I'd done the medication therapy, I'd done the self-care, I'd done all the things I needed to do to survive this pandemic and this new challenge. Whew. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So, eye of the storm. Eye of the storm. I'm in the eye of the storm on my hike. I have no clue what I'm going to do. I'm in the eye of the storm during the pandemic, and I have no clue what I'm going to do. So, I said to myself, you're going to have to start over. You're going to have to leave your life behind because it's not safe for you there. Mentally, physically, emotionally, it just wasn't safe. So I moved back in with my parents, as I was saying, and I applied to a position at CMHA Durham. And what CMHA Durham doesn't know, but what they know now, is that I was hypomanic when I applied for that job. And I did a very lovely spoken word poem on what recovery is and what it meant to me. And I ended up, it took some time, but I did end up getting that position. But I think the biggest part, the biggest thing I learned was that COVID, as I was telling my table earlier, it was a manic storm for me. It was a manic storm. I experienced financial vulnerability. I experienced hyper everything, challenging relationships. I went on Tinder. I mean, we're not going to get into it. Like that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But I was on it, you know, so like it was a lot of challenges. But what COVID did give me, it was a blessing at the same time. Because I was telling the table earlier, they asked me, how did people with mental illness handle COVID? Like, how did they handle it? And I jokingly said, well, when I talked to my clients when I was on the ACT team at CMHA Durham, and even my clients in the recovery college, I said to them, it was just another Tuesday to us. I mean, at the end of the day, we'd been through isolation. We'd been through anxiety. We'd been through depression. We'd been through mania, psychosis, all of that. We knew what that was like. We knew what that chaos looked like and felt like. Everybody else didn't. So it was kind of just another Tuesday to us, until it wasn't, of course. I mean, nobody knew it was going to last for 2 years. Nobody knew we wouldn't see each other's faces for 2 years, and I'm so glad to see all of your faces today. But as I said, lots of blessings came out of COVID for me, out of the pandemic. I reconnected with my family. They got to see me go through my hypomania and see me survive it. Because I'm okay now. I'm okay. I'm good now. I experienced a lot of stressors during that time. I had my godmother die, my uncle die. I lost my job. I experienced financial vulnerability. There were so many things going on all at once, but I knew to keep myself centered and grounding and to anchor myself, similar to anchoring myself with Onika to that tree, was again surrounding yourself with a team of people that care for you. I always call them my team. They're my family. They're my friends, but they are my team. And without them, I could not have survived the last 2 years. If you guys have a best friend, today is Best Friend Awareness Day or Best Friend Day. So So I want you after this to reach out to your best friends and say hi and say thank you for being my best friend. I've got lots of best friends. My family's my best friend, my friends are my best friends. You'll all probably be my best friends after this speech. You're all my best friends. Because I know without people and without that connection, which is what I was lacking when I was in Toronto, I didn't have that connection. And without that connection, I wouldn't have survived. I needed my mom, no matter how much she irritates me. I needed my dad, no matter how much he irritates me. My sister, you know, I still stay connected with close friends in Toronto. I talked to one right before I came in here, and she gave me the encouragement I needed to stand up here and talk to all of you today, because I was so nervous at the beginning, and I'm still a little nervous now. But it brought so much into my life, and it brought me to CMHA Durham, to the job I currently have, to the Recovery College Wellness Center. I'm a peer support specialist, and I love what I do. I educate people on mental health and mental illness. You know, I'm a listening ear for those who need someone to talk to. I can share my lived experience story and give people hope for their futures. You know, this is, when I lost my job originally, when I lost the job in Toronto at the Recovery College, I cried. I was so upset because I didn't know that life was going to lead me to where it was going to lead me to. And all I knew was in that chaotic moment, in that storm, the only way out was through, and that there was going to be sunshine after the rain. I knew that. I had faith. I had confidence in that. And I think after so many years of struggling with my mental health, that period of wellness, knowing what that looked like and felt like, the last 6 years prior to COVID, knowing that I was able to handle certain stressors. The pandemic was a gauntlet. It was a gauntlet that I think I got through. And I think I did pretty well. And at the end of the day, like I said, the only way out is through. There's sunshine after the rain. There's light at the end of every dark tunnel. And yeah, I think that's it. That's it. I was going to say something else profound, but it didn't come out. But anyway, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to my team at CMHA Durham for supporting me. And thank you, Ricky, for offering to bring me something to eat, but I probably wouldn't. So I'm glad I just had coffee. But that's it for me. Have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you, Onika. It's just going to take me a moment. You brought me through a lot of ups and downs in your speech. It was terrific. My name is Kathleen Devine, and I am Senior Municipal Relations Manager at OLG. And I'm thrilled to be here with a few of my team members at OLG. And you've heard from Kristen Ward, my colleague Karen Smiley, and another colleague, Tash. And again, thanks to the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade for organizing today and including us. So, Onika, wow. I think another round of applause for Onika. You really shared what seemed to be your authentic self with us. You know, you can see that. And I could relate to a lot of what you were talking about. You know, I also think of my family as my team. We are Team Divine. We'll go through anything, ups, downs. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our first presenter, Christina Fuda, Mental Health Training Coordinator for Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences, located in Whitby. Ontario Shores is a public teaching hospital. It provides a range of specialized services and assessment and treatment services to those living with complex and serious mental illness. Exemplary patient care is delivered through safe and evidence-based approaches, where successful outcomes are achieved using best clinical practices and the latest advances in research. Patients there benefit from a recovery-oriented environment of care that is built on compassion, inspiration, and hope. Christina has spent the past 7 years training people on how to have conversations to promote a healthy work-life balance for ourselves and in our workplaces, as well as how to actually access the care. So Christina is going to share with us a bit of information on how to promote a healthy work-life balance and the resources available in the community. So won't you all please join me in welcoming Christina Fuda.
Thank
Your
you.
microphone.
Perfect, that's wonderful. Alrighty, thanks everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. Man, tough act to follow, Onika. That was amazing. Oh my goodness, I'm like, wow, your presentation just gave me chills. So I love hearing from lived experience from people that have lived through mental illness, and I feel fortunate as well, as I love how you mentioned, being part of the Recovery College. I feel fortunate that I get to do this stuff every day. It's been a long time since I've trained in person though. It was really nice to come here in person. I was making a joke with everyone at my table. I ran out of the house in my grubby old flip-flops this morning. And I'm driving here and I'm like, oh my God, do I have enough time to stop and get some shoes? So Walmart special, here we go. I just couldn't stand up here in my flip-flops. But anyways, thank you all for being here. Do I get a clicker? I'm sorry. Oh, you're just
not.
next slide. Okay, well next slide, please.
Yes, here's the clicker.
Just to give all of you a little bit more information about our hospital. So for those of you that maybe are unfamiliar with Ontario Shores, we are one of the largest employers in Durham region. We've got about 1,200 staff. We're one of the only 4 standalone mental health hospitals in the entire province of Ontario. So most people have heard of CMHA, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. We're located right here in Whitby though, right in Durham region. Really nice waterfront property as well. There's the Royal in Ottawa and there's Waypoint. But what a lot of folks don't know about Ontario Shores is, for one, when I do training, a lot of times I'll say I work at Ontario Shores. I'm like, who's heard of Ontario Shores? I get 2 hands. And I'm like, okay, who's heard of Whitby Psych? It's like, we're the same place. So we're the same place. We're a mental health hospital. But unlike that very dated, stigmatized view of mental health facilities, we actually do offer a lot of outpatient programs. So most of our patients are outpatients. And I'm going to share with you today how to access some of those resources. So next slide, please. Now this right here, it's a little hard to see, but it's just talking about the prevalence of mental health that we've experienced in this last couple of years. Unfortunately, COVID took a big impact on our mental health, and I love what you said, Onika, it's another Tuesday for those living with mental illness, but for those that haven't, this was a really, really big adjustment. This was a really, really big change. And so what you're seeing here, this black line up here, this is the baseline of where mental health typically is. This is where we were in COVID, is we took a big dive. And as you can see, this is the trends over the 2 years, and it hasn't really changed much. So we've had a really big impact from this past couple of years on our mental health. 46% of people are reporting that they're feeling more stressed because of the pandemic. Still, this lasting effect. And that 45% are saying that yes, this did have a negative impact on my mental health. And so this is why I think it's so important to talk about mental illnesses in our workplace now more than ever, especially as people are transitioning, coming back as well. Next slide, please. Now, while a lot of our mental health got low, I'd just like to share with you this thing called the mental health continuum that shows that even though we can have poor mental health, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have a mental illness. And just because somebody has a mental illness does not mean that they have poor mental health. There are a lot of people out there living with mental illnesses that are thriving, that they're doing well, they're managing, they're coping, they exercise, they eat good, and a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today is about building that resiliency. But we can experience poor mental health. Most of us went down here, especially that first few months as soon as COVID hit. But many of us built this resiliency. We had the resiliency beforehand. We were able to build ourselves through it. But many weren't. And that's why we need to talk about what resources are out there. How can we access care? So next slide, please. Now this right here just shows that a lot of the time stress gets a bad rap. Anxiety gets a bad rap. We say things like anxiety and stress, and we always think of it as a negative. But it's actually not always a negative. We do need a little bit of stress in our life. And so what this chart is really showing is that stress is our response to a threat. So we experienced a threat this last couple years, and it was okay to feel anxious. It was okay to feel that emotional reaction, because that's what got you through it. It's that fight or flight response. But the problem is when we get into this distress phase, if we're there for too long. And so I love teaching managers in the room. Is one of my workplace training activities I get them to write down the alphabet, and I give them 2 minutes to come up with a word for every single letter of the alphabet that has to deal with anxiety or stress. Well, first of all, I tell them 3 minutes. And then what I do is I start yelling at them the whole time. And I'm like, you're doing a bad job. That is a stupid word. What were you thinking? Why would you pick a word like this? Okay, you know what? You're doing such a terrible job, I'm taking a minute off. And then you know what they do is they yell at me and they yell back and they're like, I'm not doing this. And they'll throw the marker down, and that's one of my groups. But other groups, what I do is I give them encouragement. And I say, you can do this. I'll give you 3 minutes, work together as a team, and I just leave it alone at that, and I give them a countdown. And you know what? The group that doesn't get the added stress does better. And so I like to teach that in workplaces, because if you're putting too much stress on your employees, their performance is dropping. They're ending up in that distress phase. So we need to find the right balance of stress in our workplaces where you don't get them in that distress phase. But at the same time, you don't want to put no stress, because then you get the person that comes in an hour late, reading the newspaper, swiping Facebook. We don't want that either. So we got to find that nice balance. Is really what this is. And so, unfortunately, if we're in that distress phase for too long, that's where mental illnesses can start to come out. And who is at risk for mental illness? We all are. Is any one of us. Now, some people have more of a genetic predisposition for mental illness, but our environment, particularly our work lives, can cause a lot of that distress and can cause a lot of that in our mental health. And so we really want to maintain that balance for ourselves, for our employees, because if we don't, it's going to impact all areas of our brain function. So prior to my job here is I used to do neuroscience research. And so when I talk about mental illness, I love to talk about the brain. It's my favorite stuff to talk about. But always remember, your brain is doing everything. It's your emotions, it's your thoughts, it's your ability to make decisions, concentrate, pay attention. And so when this gets sick, when this is being overloaded with too much stress, everything starts to get sick. And so that's why you get employees on your team that can't make decisions anymore. They can't concentrate, they can't pay attention, their physical health, they're tired, they're getting digestive issues, all of these sort of problems can come up. And so, next slide, please. And so resiliency, I'm sure we've all had moments like this in the past couple years, it's really about resiliency. And I love, Onika, you said it perfectly. You had all the skills, before the pandemic to basically help yourself get through this. And that's really what building resiliency is about. It's building these skills to adapt to life challenges, because life is always going to throw challenges at us. We're going to have times in our work life where it's busy, where we've got a lot going on. We're going to have times in our family life where there's so many things happening. And just, global pandemics that just come out of nowhere. And so we have to build this resiliency to help us manage emotionally and physically through these tough times. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it by yourself, though. That is a common misconception that I think a lot of people have. And that thinking they got to do this alone, that they got to, exercise by themselves, they got to, eat. But I love the way you talked about having a team. And so we need that family support, we need that friend support, but there's no shame in accessing professional care as well. And so is recognizing that we need those doctors, we need counselors, we need mental health professionals, just like we need accountants and barbers, mechanics, and starting to look at mental health professionals as helping us build this resiliency. So next slide, please. And so I do want to talk a little bit about our own self-care versus self-indulgences, because this is about that balance. We sometimes confuse the two. So you can keep clicking through. So self-care makes you feel good in the long term. Now I have that little picture of the money there because I like to think of self-care as deposits. Self-care is your deposit into your health. So these are the things that we do that we don't really want to do. Like, it's so much more fun spending money than saving money. But we need to save money or else we're not going to be in a good position to spend money. And so examples of self-care are the things like physical exercise. Whether that is hiking, whether that's playing a sport, it's going to the gym, we need physical exercise. Healthy diet, is a huge part of our self-care. We don't always, want to eat that salad. It is like Popeye's chicken sandwich is probably my biggest weakness. That's pretty much all I want to eat all the time. But I know I can't. So getting proper sleep, cutting yourself off, even though you got that one more Netflix episode you just want to get through, you want to find out what happens. Meditation is so important. It's really about, being able to train your brain to focus on calming the mind. It's a practice. It's called practice for a reason because it really does take a lot of practice. Volunteer work makes us good. When we're helping others, it's a huge part of our self-care. Donating our time to care for the needs of others is huge part of self-care. Learning something new. So, spending time, learning a new language, learning a new skill. It makes us feel good when we've accomplished it. We don't always feel good while we're doing it, right? We get frustrated, but you keep at it. And cleaning and organizing is not always, we don't want to spend our Saturday, scrubbing toilets and all that stuff we got to do, but we feel better when it's done. So this is the self-care. This is the stuff that helps us feel good. Now, next slide, please. Indulgences. This is where we spend money. This is also good. So you can kind of just go through these. These are the immediate gratification. This is the stuff we do also need. It's those spa days. So a lot of people confuse, the bubble bath spa day. They think that's self-care. It's more of a self-indulgence. It's the immediate gratification. It's having a glass of wine or beer. For me, I just find when I finish mowing the lawn, it needs a beer. Because, beer and lawns go together. And that's a good thing. Comfort food, it's okay to have that chicken sandwich every now and then, or, double fudge brownie, whatever yours is. Those binge watching Netflix days, we don't give rest days enough kudos. We always feel like we have to go and go and go. But we need those days where you don't do anything. Where, you lie in bed, you read a book, you binge watch Netflix, and you just enjoy your relaxation time. And then retail therapy. Like, I actually am a sailor, so I'm loving being here. My motto's always been when in doubt, buy a boat. But, retail therapy makes us feel good. But the thing here is, if you notice, these, all of these self-indulgences, these are like spending money. So if you have a lot of savings, if you're good at eating healthy and exercising, and you do a lot of good things like volunteer work, you meditate, you've got room to spend. Nobody wants to spend all their time saving. It's okay to engage in these every now and then. But if you're drinking every day, if you're not exercising, if you're binge watching Netflix all the time, you're gonna deplete your bank account. So everybody manages their own account the way they want to. But just kind of keep those things in mind. If you got enough savings, you got money to spend. If you don't have enough savings, you're not gonna feel good about spending the money. So next slide, please. So now that is part of our building resiliency. But the other part of building resiliency is knowing when we need help, is knowing when we need to reach out to professionals. And so our professional treatment, a lot of people I find are very confused about how to access care. I've been doing training over the years, and I gotta be honest, when I first started at the mental health hospital, I was confused. I didn't know how the whole mental health care system worked. It can be like, we have so many wonderful organizations out there. We've got CMHA Durham, we've got Durham Mental Health Services, we've got Catholic Family Services. There's some great supports out there, but a lot of people don't know how to kind of go about it. So the first step, make an appointment with your family doctor. Is if you feel you're in that distress phase, that red zone that I showed you with anxiety, if you feel like you're in that phase, talk to your family doctor about it. People often don't recognize that family doctors can also diagnose for mental illness. Most of us will never see these next folks, so there is a difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. Unfortunately, a lot of folks confuse the two. They go to their doctor, they might be diagnosed with, possibly severe depression, bipolar, other forms of severe mental illnesses, where they are then given a referral to a psychiatrist. And that takes 2-3 months, like it does with all specialty doctors and in our healthcare system. And they finally see that psychiatrist, and they just want to talk about how's your bowel movements, how's your sleeping, and how is you, and all these physical things. And they're like, well, don't I get to talk about how I'm feeling? And psychiatrists kind of are more focused on the medication. So that's really what psychiatrists do. They're focusing on the physical treatment of mental illness. It's the psychologist that's the counselor. They're the ones that do the talk therapy where you meet with them, every week is for the next 12 to 16 weeks. Problem is they're both called doctor. So that's why people get confused. It's just one's an MD, one's a PhD. So it's about, but we like all, we like both. Now, most of us, psychiatrists tend to work with people with more complex mental illnesses. So more complex illnesses where they have a combination of illnesses, more severe ones. Most people that get mild or moderate forms of depression, anxiety, it'll be your family doctor that prescribes medication. And next slide, please, or next thing, please, is, and most of us can reach out to a counselor or a mental health therapist. So in Ontario, you have to have a minimum of a master's degree to provide some sort of counseling. And so these are registered psychotherapists, these are social workers. These are the folks that you can get through like your employee assistance programs. So when you call your employee assistance program, you can usually access one of these folks. Very rarely will you get a psychologist. Psychologists kind of head they oversee. A lot of counselors and mental health therapists will work under a psychologist, kind of like when you go to the dentist, right? The hygienist is the one that cleans your teeth, and the dentist kind of comes and checks in on you. It's same sort of philosophy. And then the last part is self-care. So a combination of all of these forms of treatment is the best. So our family doctor for medication, call your EAP, set yourself up with some counseling. If you have benefits, you can use that as well. And next, I'm also going to talk about what supports are available in the community. So next slide, please. Sorry, before that, but just some statistics on treatment is that 80 to 90% of people do respond very well to treatment. If you catch it earlier, yeah, you can keep on just going through here. You can catch it earlier, it is a lot easier to treat. So just like with physical illnesses, we do early cancer detection screening. It's a lot easier to treat when we can find an illness early. So if you start to see the early signs of anxiety and depression, make that appointment. It's so much easier to treat. Now, it's not a quick fix though. That's the thing with mental illness. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of time to try and find the right treatment that works for you. We're all unique, we're all a little different. Our brains are all different. So we don't all have the same memories and experiences. So different counselors are gonna work for different people. Different types of medications are gonna work for different people. So I find a big part of my job when it comes to training people on how to talk to folks with mental illness is to give them encouragement to keep trying. Unfortunately, so many people can, they'll go to see that first counselor, they'll call EAP. I've heard this one so many times, they'll call EAP. Oh, well, I called EAP, person was a jerk, I'm not calling again. And it happens, guys, it does happen. Sometimes the person is a jerk, sometimes you just don't get along. And, that's normal human nature. But the way that I like to describe it, I'm like, picture, everybody in this room at some point in your life has had a bad haircut. We've all had a bad haircut. But can you imagine getting a bad haircut and then saying, oh my gosh, they did such a terrible job, I'm never getting my haircut again. It's like, it doesn't work. So part of our job is to recognize, though, that making that first step is really tough. For somebody with mental illness, making that first phone call, making that first step is a really tough thing. So if you can give them that encouragement and say, hey, you're on the right path. I'm sorry you had a bad experience, but it's normal. And keep trying. You will find someone. You will find someone you connect with. You'll find someone that works with you. And there's lots of supports out there. And so giving people that encouragement to keep trying until they find what works for them. This right here is just like a study I like to show that common myth that a lot of people think when it comes to mental illnesses is that you have to leave work in order to get treatment. That is for people with more complex, more severe mental illnesses. Most of us will have mild forms of depression, anxiety, things like that. You can often talk to your doctor, call your AP, and do this while you're still working. It is not everybody is as brave as Onika and other peer support workers to talk about their experience with mental illness. I always say, kudos to those folks that can get up here and share something so personal and really share that experience, because that is a really tough thing to do. Not all of us are ready for that. So I like to share with folks, you don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to tell your employer, you don't have to tell your family if you're not ready to. You can get the treatment while you're still working, while you're still taking care of your families. And there's lots of options out there. So how do we access care? Well, in crisis, I always like to, of course, share our crisis resources out there. So this right here, I give out to everyone in my training. It's Canada Crisis Line. It's 24 hours a day, and it doesn't matter where you are in the country. You can access this crisis line. Now we're fortunate, we also have a local mental health service, so Durham Mental Health Services is our local crisis line. They also work with Durham Regional Police Services if we need to have our crisis units attend a call. but they can take people to the hospital. And so this is for anyone who is experiencing crisis situations where they're in immediate danger, and we need to get them that immediate support. So next slide. Now we also have the non-crisis resources. So we've got CMHA Durham, wonderful organization, excellent. And yes, you've got that assertive community treatment, lots of amazing resources through CMHA Durham. But you also have Ontario Shores, so one of the mental health hospitals. We're a great resource too. We also just redesigned our website in December. It's really easy to use now. You go on the main page, you can do a drop down by here's age range, here's service, here's what I need, and you can kind of check out the services that we offer there. All of these are all free. These are all government funded, resources. So people don't have to pay for these ones. Next slide, please. Now, something that people don't know about with Ontario Shores, we also have a prompt care clinic. This is kind of in the middle between emergency and the long-term care services like Ontario Shores, CMHA Durham. What the prompt care clinic really does is it's located in the Whitby Mall, so a lot of folks don't even know it's there. But we've got this location in the Whitby Mall. It's basically for people that are not quite in crisis, aren't quite in, they gotta wait too long, but they can see somebody usually get an assessment within about 3 days. And so it's really about getting a person access to this care. All assessments are done by psychiatrists, so we've got the medical doctors there, we've got clinical psychologists, we've got counselors, we've got all this interdisciplinary professional folks there. And so you get a brief one-time follow-up session to review different community resources, but the nice thing is they get to talk to somebody, within a couple days and know that there's hope out there and know that there's additional treatment following. So this is a really great clinic. It does have the regular sort of office hours of 8:30 to 4:30, but definitely trying to promote some more of our clinics out there because some of them are actually underutilized. I've even heard our trauma response clinic for first responders didn't get as much utilization as we were hoping it to, even a healthcare worker one. So a lot of them go through their workplace EAP, but we do have some services out there, so check us out. And so my main role is to deliver training, kind of like what you just saw here. We've basically been doing this for 7 years. It started with just me, and now we've got a few instructors. So I get to come out and talk at events like this, and a couple instructors are teaching mental health first aid right now, and doing other different resources. So as part of our training, what we do is we do like to help talk a little bit more about recognition, so recognizing signs and symptoms of mental illness, spend a lot of time doing that, and then how to have these good, healthy conversations with folks. How can I encourage them to reach out to their doctor? How can I encourage them to access these resources? So we do offer different training programs. We're just starting a new one as well. It's going to be a 4-hour suicide awareness training. So I'm really excited to start that, to give people the tools on, how do you talk to somebody that's starting to experience suicidal thoughts? It's a tough conversation. But here's some of our results. So I got to give kudos to the wonderful people at OPG. They've been partnered with us since 2015. They've trained thousands of employees in some of our training programs over the years. And so these are the results of training their managers. This was a 2-day back-to-back mental health first aid course where we did tons of pre and post surveys, and we asked on a scale of 1 to 10, do you feel comfortable speaking with a coworker if they just approach you to discuss their mental health concern? Blue lines were before the training, red lines were after the training. So we had a huge shift in comfort levels. And next slide, please. And this is another organization that we work with, but we did the opposite. We trained frontline employees before the managers. And so yeah, you can keep on clicking. It's one of those things, yeah, keep going. One more, there we go. And this is one of those ones where we asked the employees, I would feel comfortable speaking to my supervisor or manager where I just experienced a mental illness. Only 30% said they would before the training. So we can train the managers all we want, but if the employees don't feel comfortable having these conversations, communication kind of ends there. So it was an interesting kind of study that we did here where it really does depend on that two-way communications of people knowing more about mental illness, all of us destigmatizing it, all of us being comfortable, having these tough conversations in order to get the person the support that they need. And so if you're also, we have a wonderful podcast as part of our hospital. So myself and Julie, our colleague Daryl, he started this a couple years ago, but it's free, it's wonderful. Go on our website. We've got lots of great information from other experts, people in the field that can talk about trauma and whatever sort of mental illness you're interested in. We've got a lot of like celebrities that have come on too, and local musicians and athletes, and Daryl's really into sports, so he tends to get a lot of sport podcasters and athletes. So but they talk about their experience with mental illness. You can check us out on our social media. We're always pushing good content, letting people know of new programs. So I always like to promote that as well. And you can reach out to me too. So for any training needs that you like, and that's what I got, folks. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you again. Cheers.
Thank you, Christina. That was amazing. I think I figured it out. I now know why I do best at work when there's time running out and I have to do that presentation and it's due tomorrow morning. I'm in the good stress zone. Excellent, thank you. And I also have a new motto. I recently moved from downtown Toronto I also had to get out of Toronto, Onika. I moved out of downtown Toronto and I moved to Port Stanley, Ontario, on the shores of Lake Erie. My new motto, when in doubt, buy a boat. I'm good to go. So thanks again. So I'd now like to speak about our next speaker, Kumaran Nadesan, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of 369 Global. So 369 Global is now headquartered in Ajax, and it's a rapidly growing business conglomerate with interests in education and training, creative industries, financial services, social impact, and much more. With a strong leadership team experienced in building businesses in North America, in Europe, in South and Southeast Asia, this group continues to seek out opportunities that focus not just on the bottom line, but to help shape meaningful global conversations and outcomes for our generation, the next generation, the next generation. I'm told we can learn more at their website, www.369global.com, so please check that out. And also, please join me in a warm welcome in welcoming Kumaran to the podium.
Thank you, Catherine, for that divine introduction. That's my dad joke for the day. How's everyone doing so far? That's great. This is a very. I'm going to take a minute to be selfish and say it's a very important day for me. I'm wearing a tie in 2.5 years. I scheduled 10 minutes to just close my top button. I went over time. Uber Eats took all my money over the last 2 years. But jokes aside, thank you so much again for having us here today. It's a real pleasure to be here at an important conversation that the Board of Trade is hosting. Before I begin, I just want to point out 2 other people from our group who are in the room. Claude Flint, our business development manager at one of our agencies, which is 369 Connect, which is a brand and strategy agency that we have within the group. And I know the other gentleman is a board member, but I'm going to claim him as ours today. Dinesh Kumar, our senior VP of growth at the group, and the man with the plan for Durham. Thank you. The reason why we felt very strongly about this particular conversation is because it really hits home for us. I won't get into the details of what the group does. That's the website, I guess. But one of the entities in the group is a career college called Computech. We've been around for 30 years. We acquired the college in 5 years ago, went through a meteoric growth even over the pandemic. And I want to give you a story to illustrate maybe best why we're here today. So, we have different courses, healthcare, business technology, faculties, and there's a gentleman sitting in an enterprise network engineering class that we offer. The instructor is teaching. The instructor, I guess my chairman was either auditing the class or he was in the room somehow, and the instructor is teaching, and a question is asked, and he raises his hand. And his, I guess his right hand, and 2 of his fingers are cut off at the top. So, the class ends, we pull him aside and say, what's going on with that? So this gentleman was working in the meat cleaving sort of place in Loblaws, I think, or Sobeys, one of those places, and he chopped off his fingers. And he was a neurosurgeon in Nigeria. So imagine being a neurosurgeon and your fingers are cut off, what do you do? And these are the stories that we hear from our students. Our students are newcomers to Canada, immigrants, permanent residents. And think of the privilege, relative privilege that we have during the pandemic. And imagine coming into the country or just before the pandemic happened and then being isolated with this new layer of isolation. So for us, yes, it's a sponsorship, whatever you call it. But these are the stories that we become intimately familiar with. We hear them all the time. There are other things going on. We have 75% of our students in Computech. I'm just talking about one business in the group. Are women of color. There are some issues of domestic violence. So very pertinent this conversation for us. We are learning a lot. I'm going to talk to Christina about some mental health training afterwards as well. But thank you again so much, Ajax Pickering Board of Trade, for this. I really appreciate the opportunity for us to be a part of this thing. It gives me now great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Julianne Nayler, a registered psychotherapist, a NADA, I think I'm butchering this, and my wife is a psychotherapist, she's going to kill me when she sees the recording. A NADA registered trainer and a senior addictions counselor with the Mental Health and Pinewood Center program of Lakeridge Health. The Pinewood Center of Lakeridge Health provides a variety of services to help people with alcohol, drug, concurrent mental health and gambling related concerns. Its wide range of treatment services include residential withdrawal management services, residential treatment services, structured community-based individual and group services, and walk-in and telephone support. Combined with the mental health program at the Ajax Pickering Hospital, Lakeridge Health has the second largest mental health program in the province of Ontario. Please join me in welcoming Julianne to the podium.
That was like a mouthful, thank you. The French in me is dying that I have to hold this mic because I'm such a hand waver. So I was like, oh my gosh, focus. I'm gonna walk, okay. I mean, I've gotta be loud. I'm loud enough if I can put the mic down, but it's okay, I'll keep it. So thanks for having me here today. My name is Julianne. I am a registered psychotherapist, a NADA RT, so I am also a registered trainer in auricular acupuncture, so needles on the ears. And so when I got asked to speak today, we were so grateful to come because I think it's it's such an important conversation, but two, it's so important, especially during this time, always, just now that we're having so many more conversations around mental health and mental illness. I mean, we should have been having these conversations a long time ago, but it's just such a great initiative, and I feel like we're seeing more of that. I'm going into more places and work environments and doing these speaking engagements similar to you, and it's so amazing how receptive people are and wanting to have the conversation. Oftentimes, especially employers, we feel like we have to be experts in knowing the resources, having the conversation, what does that sound like, and we don't. It actually comes down to the basics, and I really wanted to emphasize today, of course, addictions and mental health, but really talking about the stigma around mental health and illness and substance use. So we can go to the next one here. We can pass this one here. So our role, our bias, I just really want to emphasize, especially with you guys at different organizations, we don't have to be experts. We don't. Our role is to create and curate environments where our employees and ourselves, where we can have these conversations. During the pandemic, we, of course, have seen such an increase at the hospital. My role is at bedside, so in the hospital, when clients come in through the emerge or they're on the mental health units, I'll meet them at bedside when there is an identified substance use concern. And my role really is just to have those conversations and really link and help bridge with the individual. And so many, during the pandemic, I was telling our table, so many individuals came in and didn't even realize, like, oh, is that problematic that I'm now consuming 2 bottles of wine a night? Oh, that is? And because it was so glorified during the pandemic, it was like my glass of wine turned into a bottle because I don't have to wake up tomorrow and get dressed anymore. I can just put my hair in a bun and pretend to be on the computer during my Zoom call or virtual meetings, right? And so the substance use and dependency just increased so much. I saw so many individuals throughout the pandemic, and we're even seeing the aftermath of it now. So we can go to the next one. I won't, next slide. Yeah. Oh, didn't work. So just to warm you guys up a little bit, okay? how would you guys, or anybody, how would you define stigma? Don't all jump at once. How would you guys define stigma? How would you label, what is it?
Being judged for
Yeah,
whatever it is you're going
being judged, maybe labeled, it can be verbally or non-verbally. When we think of mental health or mental illness, or we think of substance use, what would be some common stigmatizing labels or names or words?
It's your fault.
It's your fault. Yeah, you can just snap out of it. Why can't you just snap out of it? What other labels do we often hear? Don't worry, I'm not going to think that this is what you think. Everybody's always panicked to say the words, but we might hear crazy. Let me help you. Like anything else, just throw it out there. Pardon?
You're weird.
Weird. Yes. Psychotic. Lazy. Dramatic. Med-seeking. I train the Toronto Police too, and I learned so many words, like so many things. Frequent flyer, oh, it's her again, it's him again, right? All these labels, crackhead, pothead, the user, the needle user, right? Even in the hospital, we have the patients or clients stigmatizing, oh, that's the heroin user. I'm not the heroin, I drink alcohol. So I'm like totally on a different level, right? So you can imagine with stigma and bias, like if in a room in 2 minutes that we can come up with a few words, and I know they're rolling and spinning in your head, right? If we can come up with that, how do you think the individual themselves feels to be able to even want to talk about it, first of all, with their employer, right? Who's gonna wanna go up to their employer and say, listen, I've been really struggling. I mean, you saw the stats, we saw the stats. 30% of individuals potentially in that one environment, that one area. I'm not going to go to my employer, and I preach on stigma and bias, and I would still have difficulty going to my employer and saying, listen, I was really struggling. I'm really struggling. Like, I keep using wine because I love wine. Can you tell? But it's like my wine has gotten out of control, or I'm having a hard time just getting motivated and getting up. At our hospital, we can dress up, and I always dress up. I'm a psychotherapist. During the pandemic, I completely reverted to I'm just gonna wear nursing scrubs. I'm just gonna wear nursing scrubs, and it really took my mental health to a different place. And I was going into the hospital, but it just didn't feel like me. And so we see all these changes, right? And our role is we want to be able to, again, open to break down those barriers of stigma and be able to say, let's have a conversation with no penalizing, and let me help support you or direct you into the right place. We'll go to the next one. So just barriers, it can be a barrier to entering service, disclosing information, or even compliance or follow through. I might be terrified to tell my employer or go to someone or my employee and talk about my mental illness or mental health. Well, what are they going to think? Will they take my children away? What if they found out I was drinking too much? Are they going to report me? What does that mean? Like, there's so much fear around even having the conversation. I mean, in this room, if we're being honest, who would struggle going to their employer to say, listen, I've been really struggling with this during the pandemic, right? It's a real feeling. But we can go to the next one. So, some stats, and it's changing all the time, but 1 in 5 individuals experience mental illness in a lifetime, and then of course we know that there's a complex array of genes and different things that play a role into it. Why does it matter for employers and just in general in Canada? Our total economic burden, and this is all from CMHA and other resources and cited at the end, you can go check it out, but is $51 billion for mental illness in Canada that we spend. We spend that much money. Approximately 1.9 million have been diagnosed with mental illness, 1.6 are undiagnosed. At least 20% of people with mental illness have a co-occurring substance use disorder. Similarly, people with substance use disorders are 3 times more likely to have mental illness. We have 15% of people with substance use disorder who has the co-occurring. 75% of respondents said that they would be reluctant or refuse to disclose their mental health. So that's huge numbers, right? Keep going. And the cost at the workplace for disability, for mental illness, is about double the cost of the leave due to physical illness. So, you might be off work because you broke your hip, well, like double that cost of how much it's gonna be for someone with mental illness, right? And then investing in mental health has been shown to produce net cost benefits. So it actually benefits our company to be able to instill these program and wellness programs and be able to connect our individuals and make sure that they are okay, that we are okay and productive. I won't go through this, I'll just highlight it because our other speakers have, but do we all have mental health? Are you guys unsure? Yes, you have mental health. Yes? If not, I will tell you do. Okay. Do we all have mental illness? No, right? We all have the ebbs and flows. We all have I'm having a bad day, I'm having a good day, I'm really stressed out, I'm really anxious, I had a bad breakup, I don't know, I got divorced, now I'm transitioning, right? We all have those days, but we all cope differently. I loved how you talked about the self-care and self-indulgent. I was like, oh, geez, I'm spending way too much to be self-indulgent. So we all have ways to cope and manage with our mental health, mental illness. What I want to focus on is the substance use piece, because that's really more my expertise and where Pinewood really comes into play. So we can go to the next one, and we'll go again. I'm just going to flip over to the substance use piece here. So when we talk about addiction and dependency and substance use, there is a continuum. Which I'm going to go over. A lot of the time when we hear addiction, like we immediately, or when someone says, I've been really struggling with alcohol or weed or whatever it might be, we immediately assume, oh, addiction. We immediately think of, the raging alcoholic or the person who's, shooting up, and we immediately, most of the time, jump to, they must be so dependent. Where there's actually a spectrum and there is a continuum, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you are dependent on a substance if you are struggling with a substance. So we'll go to the next one, and you can just keep clicking because they'll all kind of come in there. Yeah, and one more time. Perfect. So if we look at the substance use continuum, this is not a diagnostic tool, but it's helpful to understand in order to maybe even approach or have a conversation, or when you're hearing an individual or having that convo. A part of my role as a psychotherapist and addiction counselor is to kind of gain that history. You don't have to do that potentially with your employee, but having an idea of, I'm not going to assume they're over here on the dependency side. Maybe they're just regularly using because they've been really stressed out, right? Or they've been really anxious, or they had something changed in their life, and that's just how they've been coping, and it turned into something more regular. So when we look at this continuum, we have non-use, experimentation, so maybe I'm just, trying something here and there, I don't know, I'm going to a rave and let me just pop an MDMA, or like I'm going to try smoking, or, so you're just experimenting with it. Then you have recreational, so maybe every time I go to the rave, I decide to have have MDMA, and that's really the only times I ever use it. Or maybe every time, an event comes, that's when I'm going to have a glass of wine, right? And then we go into regular and dependent use. Regular use is now it's becoming a little bit more of a coping mechanism. I'm noticing now, and this is what happened a lot during the pandemic, and as I was saying, when things were glorified, it was like, oh, my glass of wine is turning into like 3 glasses of wine, and now, oh, my dependent, I don't even know my tolerance is going up. Next thing you know, I'm finishing a bottle a night, easy, right? Not literally me, but you know what I'm saying? So then all of a sudden there's this rationalization of, oh, this is easy, okay, and you're regularly using. And then we go into dependency, and that's when you're physically or psychologically dependent. So that's when you do experience maybe the withdrawal symptoms. So if I don't pop that pill in the morning, I'm going to be in a lot of pain all day, I'm going to be sweating, I'm going to be nauseous. Or if I don't have that drink in the morning, that bad hangover? Well, the hangover continues when you're in those acute withdrawal symptoms, and that's when maybe there's a physical dependency. Psychologically, it's, I want it, I need it, I might hide it, I don't care, I'm just going to keep using it, your tolerance is higher, and now you're not following, there's the lack of rules. And what I mean by that is, now it's kind of seeping into work. Now you keep dropping your kids off a little later. Now people are kind of noticing you look a little bit more disheveled lately, or your performance is not as much. And so these small little things, it starts to impede on the things that you probably once valued. All right, we'll go to the next. Sorry, can we flip back one more time? what I do want to say, see that little invisible line there? No one wakes up, no one is born and no one wakes up one day and says, today is the day that I'm going to be dependent on crack. No one does that. Nobody does that, right? It's a slow progression, and it's keeping in mind that when we maybe notice an employee, maybe we notice there's some differences, it's not, again, automatically assuming it's got to be dependency. Maybe it's just become a little bit more of a regular coping strategy. How can we have that conversation? What does that look like? Break down the stigma and barrier, get support we need, okay? So we'll flip again, sorry. So I do want to point this out, and we talk about, you know, you hear a lot of people say, well, like, just stop, or, you know, they're not even admitting that they have a problem, and they're resistant, and, you know, they're in denial. They're in denial of their substance use. You hear that a lot. You're in denial. And what I want to focus on and understanding resistance is a lot of the time, I'll read this part, but the most commonly held assumption of individuals who fail to resist or change is that they are in denial. That is, they lack awareness of the impact of their behavior on themselves and others, especially related to the substance use. And, you know, in many cases, this is false. The individual themselves, whether it's mental illness or substance use, they know. They probably think about it much more than we ever would think about it or notice, right? They know. Maybe because of stigma, because of the barriers, they're just not ready to have that conversation, right? Or they're fearful or they're scared to make a change because of what will people think? Will I lose my job? Will I lose my children? You know, will I have to break up this person, or will they think I'm a bad employee? Do they think I'm a bad person if all of a sudden I'm coping or I'm struggling? This is the stigma that has surrounded mental illness and substance use for so long, and why it is so difficult sometimes to have these conversations. We'll go to the next. Has anybody ever seen this model, the Stages of Change model? It's good to it's good to have, and it's good to know. I won't go through it all, but basically it's just showing you what it means to go through the process of change. Most individuals might come to me, okay, and they are contemplative. So they're like, I think I want to make a change. I'm unsure. I've landed in the hospital a couple times because I keep overdosing. I think it's time for me to make a change. Most people, most workers, or even maybe employers, were like, okay, perfect. I'm going to send you to a residential program. We're going to get you on meds. We're going to get you this. And the person's like, whoa. I'm not ready for all of that. I'm just thinking about making a change. How many of us want to work at, like, eat spinach salad on a Monday, and the next thing you know, you ate cake again, right? Like, when it's the same example. Someone says, you know, I think I want to, you know, start getting healthy and, like, go for a run, and I think and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, let's go, and you run a marathon with the person. What's going to happen? They're going to fail, right? And so when we have conversations and understanding the process of change, it's understanding that our level and our idea of what success may be might not be that individual's idea of success. So your idea of success is you got to be sober completely, you got to go to counseling, you got to go to therapy, you got to do meds, you got to do this. And for them, it might just be like, okay, me just having that conversation was my success. Me being able to voice my concerns and say, I'm struggling, I'm going through this is what's happening. And so it's just being mindful that we don't want to rush someone through that process of change. And again, we don't have to have all the answers. We just want to be that ear and that support to say, hey, I don't know all the answers. Thanks for telling me. Let me connect. Or let's figure out what you want to do. What does that look like for you? And having that conversation. You guys all still with me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to show a quick little video. Anybody hear of Brené Brown?
Yeah.
I just love Brené Brown, okay? I love her. She's just like, I just love her. All of her talks, her things. This is a cute little video of a talk she gives on empathy versus sympathy. I always love showing it because it really gives us a direct example of what that can sound like and look like, especially when people come or when they want to have that conversation, what sympathy and empathy can sound like. And it's the difference between shutting someone completely down versus helping support in that moment. So if we could show that, will it click? It won't link? Do you have YouTube? I don't have the internet right now.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right, well, let me dialogue it, kind of. Oh, okay.
Password.
There we go.
Click connect. I can't say it out loud or everyone would have it.
So Brene Brown, and for those that don't know her, Google her, she's bomb. She does amazing talks on empathy, vulnerability, you know, just really good topics, and I find she's just very easy and relatable to listen to, and I find I've used tons of her stuff, even in therapy with clients, and being able to explain to them basics. I've shown them so many videos of hers, because she's a great speaker. Oh, it's working, yay, okay.
You have internet.
Yeah, it's just like
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Thank you.
Amen, sister.
So good, right? So I really loved, you know, just on that theme of theme, and Onika mentioned that, and just connecting and being able to have a support system and have a team. And a lot of the time when we, you know, have individuals, or maybe we suspect something or we're unsure, a lot of what we really are looking for is just someone to hear us and connect with us. And again, not having all the answers, but just similarly saying, I'm sitting with you, I hear you, I might not get it all, but I can certainly just be here with you. I can certainly just listen to you. I can certainly connect you, you know, and oftentimes, because most of us are fixers, we feel like we have to have all these answers, and we really don't. It's often just wanting to connect and showing that empathetic response. I really always like to highlight this because we think empathy comes easy, and it really doesn't, or we get very uncomfortable in our skin when people share vulnerable things, especially I think in the workplace. Especially in the workplace, because it's like, oh, keep it professional. Right? It's that stigma of like, why are you suddenly sharing that with me? And, or, okay, I gotta fix this really quick, or I gotta just like pretend the person didn't say anything and just keep going, or whatever it is, right? If we can slide. So it's just
really emphasizing those empathy skills, and she mentioned it in her video, so perspective taking, just looking at the perspective. We were mentioning that at our table earlier. Being non-judgmental, understanding another's feelings, even to be able to just communicate that you understand another's feelings, and mindfulness, just being mindful and sitting with the person. Again, not having all the answers, but just being mindful of what they're telling you, and this could be a very vulnerable and first-time moment that they're sharing something. And then empathy misses, so sympathy versus empathy, the gasp and awe, like, oh my gosh, really? Like oh my gosh, you've been struggling? I didn't even know. And so often that can make someone feel very uncomfortable because they're like, why is it that shocking, right? And it comes from good intention, right? But we're just so used to doing that. The mighty fall, like, oh my gosh, out of all people, I never expected you. You're just so strong. I never thought you'd have an issue with alcohol, or I didn't know you had a mental illness, and all of a sudden it's like a mighty fall, like they've fallen from their chair, and the person's like, wow, again, that pressure, right? The block and tackle. Okay, who's causing you stress? I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna go do it. Right? It's like all of a sudden you're like it's like football, and you're like, let me just make sure that I block and tackle all the stressors out of your life. That's not gonna help. And then you have the boots and shovel, which is, oh, okay, well, you know what? Let's bury this. Let's pretend you didn't tell me. Let's pretend, and let's just kind of like, kick the sand over it and just kind of keep it moving. And then if you think that's bad, Diane told me yesterday she was using this, right? It's all of a sudden like you're trying to help the person, but again, you're comparing, it's minimizing. So again, with good intention, but it's an empathy miss, right? And so it's practicing how do we have those empathy skills to just curate a safe conversation. We'll go to the next. So I always mention this at the end, and then I'm going to talk about our services, but you have the opportunity within your own employment agencies to curate a culture. You really do. You have the opportunity to say, okay, maybe everybody else is not getting it, but I'm going to try to model that I can be a safe space. Even if I don't have all the answers, I can try to model that I'm interested in knowing when people have concerns, or I can be someone that comes to events, gets the resources, and I'm prepared, for that conversation or whatever that might look like, right? And so you can create that culture, but we have to model it, we have to practice it. Does that mean you're gonna cry to Susie tomorrow, and you start bawling your eyes out? No, that's not what I'm saying, but it just meaning having more vulnerable, empathetic conversations can create such a different culture in reducing stigma and creating a safe space where we can start to see some hope, when the person or if the person is ready to talk. And you would be shocked how many, people, like it's your neighbor, it's your boss, it's your, your coworker that you would never anticipate, right? So in terms of Lakeridge Health and Pinewood, so I'm an employee of Pinewood Center, but we have hubs all over, and then we have inpatient and outpatient resources. Here in Durham region, Pinewood Center, we have, I'll start with inpatient actually, I should start that. So mental health inpatient program, these are not my expertise, I don't know too much about it, I know more about the addiction side, but we have adult inpatient unit, we have general adult beds, psychiatric intensive care, crisis intervention team. In Oshawa, we have, again, some beds available, psychiatric intensive care, crisis intervention. We have an opiate navigator in the Emerge. So with the spike of opiates in the last few years, we have someone who specializes specifically just around opiates if they go to the hospital, and they'll help connect them to different places in the Durham region. Hospital to home support, so if an individual keeps frequently coming to the hospital with addictions, our mandate in the hospital is try to reduce that recidivism rate and get that person connected. So we have workers that will work alongside that individual short term to get them plugged in back into the community so that they don't keep repeating the hospital. And we have youth crisis intervention. We have outpatient programs, so child and youth program. We have urgent care, eating disorders program. Tons. Mental health support unit with Durham Regional Police, psychiatric services, adult integrated mental health service, Then we have our Durham Mental Health Services. We already kind of touched a little bit on that. We work alongside some of our Lakeridge Health employees, and Pinewood work alongside Durham Mental Health and go out into the community for crisis calls, things like that, and they specialize in the addiction piece. And then Pinewood, we have tons of hubs where community treatments all around, like Ajax, Port Perry, Bowmanville, Scarborough, where we have addiction counselors, and then we run tons of addiction programming. We do auricular acupuncture, we do day groups where clients can just pop in and come for a group. We have our detox beds, and then we have our RAM clinics, which is has anybody heard of the RAM clinics, the Rapid Access Addiction Medicine clinics? So that's very new, where a client with alcohol or opiate use can literally just walk in, no appointment. There's a doctor, a nurse, and 2 addiction counselors. And so we really encourage a lot of our clients just to do that. We don't want to see you in the hospital coming to the ED because they think that's where they can withdraw. They can go directly to a RAM clinic, get linked, get into a detox bed, get medication immediately. So that's been a huge mandate across all Ontario is these RAM clinics. So we have one in Scarborough and Oshawa. And then we have our distress center with Durham. So just some fun little stats here. But over 90,000, we've done over 90,000 community visits, 13,000 mental health ED visits, and 2,900 mental health admissions. So very utilized. We have tons of resources with Lakeridge Health and Pinewood. If you literally just Google Pinewood Center, you'll see them all listed out there. Same with Lakeridge Health. And again, we're all here in Durham region, and then now I'm full-time at the Scarborough Health Network with another addiction counselor, and we're meeting the needs for addictions within the Scarborough Health Network because there's none. It's either Durham or Toronto. So we're kind of new in the last 7 years to Scarborough. So again, if I don't think we're taking questions, but if anybody, there's some resources there. I really appreciate you guys coming, and again, if I can just give Onika was the one last motivating thing would be, again, it really does start with you, and it starts with your own biases and your own perceptions and your own judgments. And I can have biases for substance use and mental health and still do really good work, but I have to be aware of what my biases are, because people can feel that, you can see that, and that's not going to create a culture. We want to create a culture where we're saying, hey, let's bring the stigma down, let's bring the bias down. I'm aware that I have these biases, but let me sit in it. Let me create this environment, let me be welcoming. So I appreciate you guys having me here today, and I'm sure we'll all chat afterwards. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julianne. I really appreciated everything you shared with us, especially Brene Brown. I'm a big fan of Brene's work as well. And empathy versus sympathy, I think, is such a critical point. And I realized I do the block and tackle all the time. When you're in positions of leadership, you just want to solve the problem and go into that mode right away. And so that's a clarion call today that you've given us. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing Pinewood. It's really nice to see more integrative stuff like ocular acupuncture. My wife is doing a doctorate in integrative medicine, and she's all about all of this wonderful things. So thank you again so much for that. So I think we're going to take a bit of a break. I had a long week. My kids are sick. The elections just ended, and boy, that was just exhausting to watch. All the politicians. And then I drove down, I think, what's the street? Liverpool. And I saw the lake, and I grew up on an island. And I was just like, all right, this works. So I invite you to join me on the veranda if you like. Please take a break, bio break, food. We'll regroup in 10 minutes, but enjoy the networking as well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed connecting with more people. I never ended up going on the veranda, maybe afterwards. Thank you all. It's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Supporting mental health in the workplace is comprised of many components, including positive policies and practices that ensure support is consistent, fair, and respectful. It's my great pleasure to welcome Christine Ashton, who is a partner and lawyer at Wilson Vukelich LLP. Wilson Vukelich is a full-service law firm that includes employment and labor law. Christine is a longtime Ajax Pickering Board of Trade member, having served as president and chair, and currently serves as the chair of the HR committee, and is a member of the government relations committee. As a lawyer, she's a leader in working with employers to implement best practices in the workplace and in remote work. She's joining us today to discuss how we can develop mental health support in the workplace. Please join me in welcoming Christine.
Thank you so much, Kumar. So today's a special day for me. It's my sister's birthday, and my younger sister has been diagnosed with and has been suffering from serious mental health issues for over 20 years now. And everything that we talked about today really hit home for me. From things like the stigma. When she first started going through serious mental health issues, everyone around her didn't want to acknowledge what she was dealing with. It was to the point where people were like, well, maybe she just became like incredibly religious, and that's why she's seeing Jesus everywhere, right? I think I'm loud enough. To her having the support from the ACT team, to community housing, to her family, to local healthcare providers, to her working on her own mental health while having mental health issues. It's difficult for her. It's so hard, and I'm so proud of everything that she does every day to keep moving forward. And I know that if she was here and had heard Onika speak, she would have loved hearing everything that you said. You know, for her, goals like landing not an awful boyfriend on Tinder are real legitimate goals that she works on every day, and I know she would have loved hearing from you and everything that you've gone through and achieved, and I know that she shares the same goals that we all have for ourselves. And I think it's so important that we've taken this moment today to reflect on the importance of mental health and to break down the barriers and stigmas that still unfortunately really do exist. So today I want to talk about supporting mental health in the workplace. And it's an important conversation that all employers need to be prepared to have. It's important that employees are aware of steps that they can take to support a positive and open culture so that we can all create a better and safer, more welcoming space for everyone. So what I'm going to be talking today about is, first I'm going to go through talking about accommodation obligations in regards to mental health. Then I'm going to talk about addressing workplace harassment, as unfortunately it is all too common that individuals who are suffering from mental health issues, they're tied to or exacerbated by harassment in the workplace. And then I'm going to talk about proactive steps that employers can be taking in order to support employee mental health in the workplace, from remote work to disconnecting from work, leadership and communication training, and team events and activities. So we'll start off by talking about accommodation in the workplace. So obviously, this is the right thing to do, but if you were like not motivated by that for some reason, it's still your legal obligation to do it too. So you have obligations under various sources of law in regards to a mental health issue. The first and foremost is obviously underneath the Human Rights Code. And so that says that you have an obligation not to discriminate or harass someone because of a disability or perceived disability. And that includes also in regards to obligations such as family status and so forth. You also have obligations underneath the Employment Standards Act, and that includes to provide certain protected leaves. You also have potentially obligations underneath the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act and underneath the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and that includes in regards to workplace harassment. So you want to be mindful that when you're considering a potential mental health illness or potential mental health issue or harassment within the workplace, that there are a variety of different sources of your legal obligations. So I just had, for example, a client who called me yesterday. They have an employee who's in crisis, and they said, well, they've already gotten their 3 days underneath the Employment Standards Act. Is that all the leave they're entitled to? Well, the answer is obviously no, it's not, right? Underneath the Human Rights Code, they're entitled to as much time off as they need, right? So there's no hard limit. But I don't think that this employer was trying to do them wrong, right? It's just difficult out there because there's all these different sources of legal obligations. But if they go to the Ministry of Labor's website, or they're listening to a political speech, they might be led to think that you only get 3 days for you, 3 days for your family, right? But that's not it, that's not all that in terms of how it works. So if an employee comes forward and they say, I need accommodation because of what I'm currently going through, or I need to take a leave of absence because of what I'm currently going through, or if you as an employer say, you know what, I'm sensing something's going on here, I'm not sure what it is, and we need to have a conversation, right? Because oftentimes I'll have clients who have an employee who's not performing well. They're clearly struggling, they don't know what it is, and so they want to start off that conversation, make sure that it's clear to the employee, the door is open, let's talk about it. So the first thing you need to figure out as an employer are what legal obligations are at play here, right? What are we talking about? Are we talking about an issue of workplace harassment? So the Occupational Health and Safety Act can be applied. Are we talking about a disability? So the Human Rights Codes can be applied. So you want to keep that in the back of your mind. Next, you want to consider what's going to happen while the request is being reviewed. So if an employee has come to you and says they need to take time off, is the initial response going to be, okay, take that time off and let's have a conversation further to see if we can have you still keep working while being accommodated, right? If there seems to be that the employee's in crisis, it could be that you're going to say, we'd like you to take this time off. Maybe you don't feel that you need it, maybe you don't actually need it, but we'd just like you to take this time off so that we can have a conversation while you're not underneath the stresses of work, right? So you want to first figure out exactly what you're going to be doing while the conversation is going to be had. It could be that it's a short, easy conversation. Maybe they don't need to take time off. Maybe nothing needs to change. Or maybe it's going to be more involved. Maybe there's issues or concerns about workplace harassment. So perhaps while this is all occurring, that individual is going to need to be reassigned. Or communication is going to need to be changed, right? Maybe the individual will say, I feel like right now I can keep working, but there's so many things coming at me, I just need people to communicate with me in writing. I can't take all these texts, calls, everything else, right? So just figuring out, okay, how are we going to deal with things while we're dealing with things? The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the employee understands exactly what the process is going to be like. So if there's a handbook or material that you have that you can give to them that can explain sort of how this is going to work. If they have a workplace harassment complaint, is there a form that they're going to fill in? If they're asking for accommodation, do you have a plan, which you're required to have under AOTA, do you have a plan or policy in place that explains how that process is going to work? So you want to make sure that the employee is just as informed as you are. And I'll say that this can help both you and the employee, right? If this is your first time dealing with an accommodation request, it's really great if you figure out, okay, well, how does this work? And make sure that the employee is on the same page. If you've done it 20 times before, great, but make sure the employee understands what's going to happen next as well, right? All too often, I'll get a call from an employee who's having mental health issues and has reached out to their employer, and they literally don't know what's going to happen next. They're just like, the employee told me to take my stuff to go home, that they'll be in touch. They took my laptop, and I understood from my colleague that all my stuff's been reassigned. Does that mean I've been fired? Right? Like, that's literally what they're going through because they don't understand. And it's scary to see that someone else is now apparently at your desk. It sounds like you're being pushed out, right? And for an individual that's going through mental health issues or who's suffering from mental health illness, right? That is the last thing they need to be added onto their plate. So if you can, make sure that you're taking the time to walk them through that. So then what you want to do is you want to figure out, okay, what information do I need from this individual, this employee, in order to figure out what accommodation, if anything, can be provided if they need a leave of absence. Because sometimes someone will come forward and say, you know, I need to take a leave of absence because of workplace stress that I'm experiencing. But after a little bit of conversation with their healthcare provider, it turns out that they actually can continue to work, right? There can be, as we talked about earlier, maybe there's a treatment plan that would work while they're still working, right? Maybe there's an accommodation that would work so that they can continue to work, right? We change how we're communicating with that individual. Maybe some tasks are reassigned to another individual, right? So there can be things that occur, but you need to get that information. And the way to do it is to potentially have their healthcare provider complete a medical questionnaire. I'm a big fan of medical questionnaires that use checkboxes. I find if you just put a giant, like, fill in these lines about what your thoughts are, doctor, you don't tend to get the clear, crystallized information that you need, right? You want to ask questions like, how many hours of work can this person work? Do they need to change some of their duties and responsibilities? Here they are, let me know which ones should be removed. Do they need to change how communication is done? Here's what we're doing, which ones should be changed, right? So you want to take that sort of approach. But you also want to be careful about the fact that there's some things you don't need to know. You don't need to know what they're diagnosed with. It doesn't matter. It does not matter at all, 100%. You don't need to know what medication, if any, they are on. It does not matter, right? So do not ask those questions. And also keep in mind when you're having a conversation with an employee who's come forward to you that, yes, you want to be empathetic, but at the same time, there is a power imbalance, and you have to acknowledge that, right? You are coming to them as their supervisor, as their boss, as their employer. And so no matter how well-intentioned your comments may be, they might feel that you're forcing them to share more than they want to share, right? So it's always better to be open with, I'm here if you want to talk about it, as opposed to asking them pointed questions, right? So once you sort of figured out, you gathered that information, you know what accommodation is possible, if any, you know if they need to be placed on a leave of absence. Once you've done that, then you want to make sure that you actually properly respond to the request and that you properly document it. So if you're going to be accommodating them, I always recommend a written accommodation plan. It's really helpful too because the employee can then review it and be like, yes, this works for me, or I'm sorry, I think there's a misunderstanding here, this doesn't work for me, right? And the other thing you want to have in it is a check-in point, right? You want to know when you're going to be checking in again. Are you checking in 2 weeks or are you checking in 3 months? I had a client who kept calling the employee every week to say, do you still need to be on leave? Right? That was obviously causing the employee stress. Now, my client wasn't trying, like they just didn't realize, they were like, well, I thought 1 week timing was fair. And I was like, well, did you ever think, maybe just say, get your healthcare provider to let us know when things might change, right? Are things potentially going to change in a month, or is this like a 6-month thing, right? So that you can appropriately diarize when to follow up. But also don't leave things be, right? I have one client whose employee was accommodated, and 6 years later they realized, you know what? He's still in that accommodation plan. I guess we never checked in to see if he still needs it anymore, right? So you don't want to have that kind of situation either. So unfortunately, I think that all too often we are seeing workplace harassment occurring and workplace harassment leading to mental health issues. I don't think this is anything new. I just think the truth is we're just finally starting to acknowledge the fact that there is workplace harassment and that it is contributing to mental health issues. So what do you have to do? So once again, it's the right thing to do to address it, but even if you were like, I hate doing the right thing, it's the legal thing to do. You have to address it. And you have to not only address it if someone complains about it, but also if you become aware of it. I can't tell you the number of times I'll receive a call where someone says, you know what, Sandra told me she's being harassed in the workplace, but she wasn't willing to fill in the complaint form, so obviously I don't have to do anything about that. No, that's not how that works. Just because someone's not willing to come forward and complain about it doesn't mean that you don't have an obligation to address it. You still have to look into it. So you do want to make sure that you investigate any incidences of actual or possible workplace harassment. You do want to make sure that you give the opportunity to the potential complainant to be involved in that investigation, but if they don't want to, you still have to proceed ahead with the investigation. And you want to make sure that you're respectful also of those accommodation obligations when it comes to handling the investigation. So that means if the person tells you, I can't speak to you over the phone about it or meet with you about it because of the trauma that I've been through, but I can give you a written statement. Then provide that accommodation. Let them give the written statement, right? So you want to be cognizant of that when you're doing the investigation. So what you want to do is, whenever you receive or become aware of potential workplace harassment, you first, again, just like that accommodation leave, you got to figure out how are we going to do things while we're dealing with this, right? Does someone need to be reassigned? Does someone need to work from home? Does someone need to be placed on a leave of absence while we're dealing with this investigation? And you want to make sure that the steps you're following, again, are in accordance with a policy or program that you would have in place. And you have to have that policy and program in place. And it'll help you at the end of the day knowing what you need to do. And it'll help all the employees that are involved, from the complainant to the respondent, knowing what steps are going to be taken. So here's the steps. First, you got to figure out who's going to investigate it, right? And sometimes it'll make sense to have someone internally do it. Sometimes the person who would normally do it internally can't do it because of a conflict of interest. And so you'll have someone else internally do it. And sometimes you'll get someone on the outside to do it. So I often am retained by companies where it's like the owner is accused. Well, it's going to be awkward for anyone in a subordinate position to investigate it then, right? So you want to consider those types of things. Next, you obviously want to have the investigator let the complainant know that they're going to be investigating it and what the process is. And part of that is even timing, right? They need to understand, is this like a long or a short thing? Is this going to take 2 days or is it going to take a few weeks? And that timing should be reflective of, the nature of the complaint, how many potential individuals are going to need to be spoken with, vacation timing. If someone you already know is out of the country right now, don't be unrealistic and let the complainant know you're going to have a report for them in a few days. The respondent also gets to know about the fact that there's an investigation. Each individual has to be met with and their evidence and information obtained. It's documented, and then it gets reviewed by the investigator. And then finally, a report is prepared, and that report should include whatever the recommendations are. My approach is always that when I'm meeting with the complainant and the respondent, I ask them what they would like to see. And I think that's really important. If the person is like, I'm fine with working with Brian, but I need him to apologize. And I need him to take some kind of course or training so he knows why what he did wasn't okay, right? That's a very different than, I will never work with Brian again. I cannot be in the same room with him, right? But if you know sort of what the options are, and same goes for speaking with Brian. If Brian was like, I'm never going to apologize, I did nothing wrong, well, that's going to really change what the recommendations are, right? If the individual acknowledges it, is remorseful, that's very different than someone who refuses to acknowledge it and refuses to do any training, right? But I never recommend sharing those pieces with the other. Because if, let's say, she wants Brian fired, but Brian's not going to be fired, well, it's going to be really awkward moving forward if Brian knows that she was trying to get him fired. So while it's important to share the report with the complainant and the respondent, it's also important to keep in mind sections that should potentially be redacted in order to continue to allow, hopefully, a better, more positive workplace. So obviously, once that investigation is completed, you'll need to go through sort of the next steps. And that's actually really adopting and addressing those recommendations. All too often I'll see where I've done a workplace harassment investigation, and one of the recommendations has been training. And then I check in a few months later and they're like, yeah, I guess we should get on that, right? So you really do want to take those things to heart, because I can guarantee you it is 100% cheaper to do training than to hire me time and again to do workplace harassment investigations, right? You'll be so much better off, and you'll see it in terms of a reduction in things like turnover and so forth, right? Like, no one wants to be the employer who on glass ceiling, it's like toxic workplace, escape while you can, right? All right, so now I want to talk about, so we've sort of gone through sort of addressing the two common moments in workplaces, unfortunately, when you're going to have to deal with mental health issues and sort of a reactionary situation, right? Where someone has or needs to go off on a leave or accommodate or needs accommodation, or where you're having a situation of workplace harassment. But I'd like to sort of end by focusing on more positive things about how you can proactively support mental health in the workplace so that hopefully you're not going to be in a situation where you're having to deal with workplace harassment or what's not. So the first thing I want to talk about is remote work. Remote work is not a great thing for everyone. For some people, remote work can actually really support their mental health. It can mean that they avoid that stressful commute to the workplace. It can mean that maybe they have more of a chance to get out and enjoy nature. I know some people can work outside in their back patio. I cannot do it. I cannot. I'm like that dog who's like, squirrel, squirrel. Like, I just can't do it. But for some people, working remotely is great for their mental health. For other people, it's disastrous for their mental health. It means that they aren't being able to connect with individuals. They are isolated, or unfortunately in some situations, that person is now essentially spending 24/7 with an abusive partner, right? So you do really want to be cognizant of the fact that remote work isn't great for everyone, but it might be great for some. So for those individuals who are going to be working remotely, or potentially working remotely, I always think it's great to have a conversation with each employee, if you can, depending on the size of your organization, about whether or not working remotely would work for them, and then keeping in mind what things can you do to ensure that connectivity and engagement is still occurring. So my husband's with Canada Post, and they play Cahoots. His little team plays Cahoots every Friday. And it's just it's not like, it's not this huge, great, big idea that no one could have come up with. But it's just one of those little things that really helps continue to allow the team to connect during more difficult times. You also want to make sure, of course, that you are clear in terms of what the expectations are for an individual working remotely, so that you have that policy or documentation in place, that you have that agreement, and that when it comes to the time to having that person come back to the workplace, you want to make sure that you're avoiding potential disputes. So right now, for many individuals, they've been working for like 2 years remotely, and some companies are now thinking about returning them to the workplace. So the first starting point is, what I recommend is, send out an email saying, hey guys, heads up, we're thinking about potentially returning some of you to the workplace come September, so that people can make plans and start preparing mentally for that change, and potentially reach out in terms of why that would or wouldn't be a great idea for them. You also want to be prepared to discuss things like the fact that the individual might have safety concerns about returning to the workplace, where there could have been a change in health, where they're actually going to need accommodation even though they didn't before, in regards to physically working out of the workplace. So you do want to make sure that you have documentation in place that deals with remote work. If you're the kind of company that's not going to have everyone returning to the workplace as of September and you're never going to look back again, then you really need to take the moment to have remote work policies in place and individual remote work agreements in place with the employees that explain these sorts of things. You also want to keep in mind the fact that employees might decide that they don't want to return to work because of safety concerns. And if that does become an issue, you'll need to contact the Ministry of Labor. And then you'll also potentially have an employee who's claiming they're not able to return to work because of a human rights code ground. So it could be that there's anxiety that has developed or might be related to them returning to the workplace. It could be a family status obligation. So you really do want to have an open and honest conversation, just like we talked about before with accommodation. You want to have that open and honest conversation where you can figure out, okay, what would work, right? Is it a part-time situation? Are they in fact able to return to work? But it's a different setup, right? Like she cannot be next to Susan. Susan is the worst. We need to have the cubicle in the other section of the office, right? Those sorts of conversations. And then, as I mentioned before, you just want to make sure you're clear on recalling the individuals back to work. So I do have a lot of clients right now who are looking at September, communicating now, right? Because people really do make plans that far out. So the next thing that you want to do to be a proactive employer is to also support workplace disconnect. So as most of you hopefully know, recently the Ontario government amended the Employment Standards Act to require that you as an employer have a workplace disconnect policy. And that policy was required to be put into place, weirdly as it was, on election day. What does that policy have to have in it? The answer is pretty much nothing. Right? Essentially it said you have to have a policy that says like workplace disconnect 10 times and then just put on it when it was written and when you last updated it. And that was it. Now, as an employer, it's important that you take a moment and think about what can we put in our workplace disconnect policy. And you want to make sure that you properly balance certain things. You can't say, if for example you have a salesperson that's going to be expected to occasionally check their emails throughout the evening, you cannot say at 5 p.m. turn off your phone and don't look at it ever again, right? But what you can certainly say is the fact that disconnecting is important and that the expectation isn't that you're always on it, that you'll check it occasionally as needed, but that you'll definitely not check it during periods of time where you're supposed to be sleeping. So no one's expecting you to check it at 3 in the morning, right? So those kinds of things are certainly things that you can communicate. And even if the Ontario government doesn't want to expressly mandate that you can do that, I can tell you, every study out there has always shown that employees are much more productive when they're given opportunities of rest and given vacation than employees who are forced to plow on through. So I've shared here sort of the details of what the disconnect policy has to have. It has to be a policy that you wrote, it has to have the days, it has to be shared with the employees. Beyond that, there isn't really, unfortunately, a content requirement, but I still do recommend that you look at making sure that it's clear that employees have entitlements to break periods and rest periods, that employees have entitlements in regards to limits of hours of work on a daily and weekly basis, and that as a company you support disconnecting from the workplace. It doesn't mean that you have to promise to everyone that they're never going to have to check their email after 5 o'clock or before 9 o'clock, but it certainly does mean that you're recognizing the importance of the ability to disconnect. And then finally, I also want to talk about leadership and communication training. You've heard today about some of the great resources that exist within the community in terms of supporting mental health. Those resources exist not only for individuals who are suffering from mental health issues or mental health illnesses, but those resources also exist for employers to get training to become more comfortable and more familiar with how to have a conversation about mental health issues, right? Like the number of times I get clients who have like it's like a cringe, right? As soon as someone comes into their office and it's like, you know, I have something I'm going, it's like a word you don't even want to mention. Like, there's things that I'm going through right now because of stresses. Oh, those things. Yes, those things. I'm going through them. Okay then. Right? We're not playing taboo here, folks. You can say the word. But you want to be able to go through these training programs and communication programs in terms of having those conversations. You also want to go through training programs about just how to communicate with each other. Like, it's really, to me, it's so surprising that so many people in this day and age still feel that barking at someone, that demoralizing someone, those are ways to be a great leader. I was watching Below Deck, which is awesome. And one of the captains was saying, like, his personal motto was be mean to keep them keen, right? Like, that's a terrible motto. One of my clients told me that. I'd be like, well, you should buy insurance now because someone's going to sue you. But, you know, like, those kinds of things you don't want to have anymore. So you do, a lot of times people, there's no classes in high school on how to be a good supervisor. There isn't. And a lot of people just look at it in terms of how was I parented? Well, that's how I'm going to be a supervisor. And unfortunately, if they didn't come from a healthy and positive household, they're going to be a really bad supervisor, potentially, right? So you want to have those kind of training programs that teaches people how to communicate with their subordinates, how to deal with workplace conflict in a healthy way, right? So I really recommend those kind of proactive training exercises for every employee. And then finally, I want to talk about team events. So I think team events, team activities, anything you can do to promote your team to feel like they're working together is so important. So for our firm, tomorrow we're going to Niagara-on-the-Lake for the day. So we are super excited for that. It's just one of those great ways that we can come together again. I'm excited. I'm sure there's people who are going to be like, I don't even know who you are, because it's been so long since we've really been working together. But it's just one of those things, and it doesn't have to be a big thing, right? It can be a little event or activity or challenge that you're doing. It can be anything from, we're all going to try to take the stairs, or at 11:30 every day we're suddenly going to jump up and do some weird exercise that'll look weird to some other people, but that's fine. This is what we're going to do. We've had individuals at our office organize a yoga instructor to come in. We've had individuals just bringing people to speak about different subjects, from like kinds of tea you can have, other things like that. Just things to bring people together, to start the conversation, and to focus on ways to be physically and mentally healthy. So yeah, so that's my presentation. So hopefully it helped you learn a little bit more about your obligations in terms of accommodations, leaves, and workplace harassment, and also just generally speaking, how to be a more positive and supportive employer.
Thank you, Christina. That was great. So important to know employee rights and equally employee obligations. Thank you so much for that. We're not a big group. There's OLG in the room and Bell. We're a small, growing team of 100 people, but we'd like to have fun. So I think we're off to the Jays game next month, and we've gone to Dave & Buster's. We eat lunch together. Not 100 people together, but we do some of these things that you said. So it's really helpful. My next. I don't know if this mic is working, if it's not working. It comes in and out. I'd like to introduce Bill Solis, Senior Employee Benefits Consultant at the Pinewood Group, to introduce our next speaker. So he's going to introduce the next speaker. Penmore offers fully customized solutions for personal and corporate insurance, group benefits, and wealth management. Bill's expertise in employee benefits plan spans over 18 years. He was at the forefront when mental health was first proposed as an employee benefit, and he's been a strong advocate since day one. Bill is also a longtime member of the Ajax Pickering Board of Trade. He has served as president and chair, and is now a member of the Health and Wellness Committee and a member of the GR Committee. Please join me in welcoming Bill to introduce our next speaker.
I'm just going to talk loud.
Thank you, Bill, because I was just about to go do that.
That's kind of irritating.
I know. Sorry. No, nothing to apologize for. Sorry, guys, about the trouble for that.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kumaran. I just want to start out with something. Onika, thank you so much for being so open and about your journey. We really appreciate that, because I know sometimes that's hard to do. But when you said, something went off in my brain when you said you moved back home. So when I heard you say that, I thought of this little story that hopefully no one else has heard it, where there was this couple, they're sleeping away, and the husband gets up all of a sudden, his heart's racing, he's sweating and he's panicking, and wakes the wife up and says, "What's going on?" He said, "I just had a nightmare." I said, "A nightmare? Well, tell me about it. What's going on?" Well, he said, "There I was on my porch at around 95 years old in my rocking chair with a drink, listening to Led Zeppelin tunes. And then I look down the road and I see this car. It looks familiar, but I can't really figure out who it is. And the person comes out of the car and walks up and says, 'Hey, Dad.' It's his son. He's 73 years old. And he says, 'Hey, Dad, I'm moving back in. I'm divorced now for the third time.'" And he just said, "Oh God, thank God that was just a dream, right? Nothing true, right?" So, anyways, with this, today's been great. One quick thing that came to my mind when we talked about sympathy and empathy. A sad story. My son-in-law passed away last year, and I'm just thinking of how her friends and family dealt with my daughter. And most of it was good, but I think of empathy is where my daughter just says, you know, she's 20 years old. He was like 32. They're married for 11 months. Like, it's very sad. So she just wanted people to listen to her. That's it. Anybody that says, I know how you feel, well, no, you don't know how she feels. Anybody that, you know, what were we there for? Like, I can't stop, you know, I just keep talking. So you just gotta shut up and listen to her. And like, you know, your grass needs cutting, we'll come over cut your grass. I need some food, maybe in the fridge or whatever, frozen things, we'll do that. You just listen, that's all she wanted you there for. And she said that, and you know, people that said, oh, you're still young, you'll find somebody else, like, really? Or, you know, stupidest things, and people have, like, I heard good intentions, but, you know, think of what you just said. And a big thing I learned was, I didn't think about this before, was you can't say, move on. You gotta say, you move forward. Moving on is the worst thing you can say to anybody in that situation, and I think a lot of people do it. By mistake, they don't really think when they talk, but that's a huge issue. So we talk about sympathy and empathy. I really thought of that example, and the best thing to do is just to listen. That's all. That's all they want you there for, is to listen. And you know what, and you offer, you know, you need anything, you call me. And she had great support from, you know, friends, still does, and family, which is great. I mean, that's what she was looking for. She's not looking for advice on, you know, what you should do and should you move and this and that. Like, just calm down, all those things will happen later. But it just kind of brought it to my head, and I think people don't intentionally want to do those things, but they just do them sometimes without thinking. You know, I know one of the big part of the first aid course is or anything, even on the internet, fraud, they say, stop, think, you know, before opening that attachment, that malware or whatever. Don't just, you know, react like this. Think before you open your mouth. So I just wanted to bring up those couple of things. I participated in many forums on mental health over the years, and I'd like to say that I am impressed with all the information we received so far. I think the biggest thing is, you know, how do we make it simple? I said this earlier, where, you know, I have a lot of employers as clients, and we got to make it simple for people. You know, all that stuff is there, and, you know, is it a one-pager, go here, go there? I mean, all that sounded great today, but you know how many people I hear say that there's a huge wait line to get in places, and you can say, oh, that's great, but I can't get in for a year, I need help now. So as much as those resources are there, how do we make it simple for people to access what's available? Because it's not simple. And even being in this industry, I learned even more today than I knew before, and I'm trying to make it simple for our clients to give to their employees. And confidentiality is just a big issue. If people find out stuff, they're just not going to relay. And that's a big thing about EAPs. Even though the EAPs say, and they don't, it is confidential, there's a lot of people that don't believe it. They just don't believe it. I won't be promoted because you think I'm weak because of this. But there's all these resources out there, but people have to feel confident that it is there to help them, and you know, it's available to them. So, you know, that's kind of some of the stuff I heard today. So, more importantly, everything you hear today is available in Durham Region, which is great to know. A tenet of Health and Wellness Committee is to impart tools and resources that you can take away, that you can use immediately. So that's a big thing about today, is what can we take away from today? I hate going to seminars where it sort of was a waste of my morning. No, if there was 2 or 3 things we can take from this and then put them in place to help somebody, that was well worth our time. So it's with great pleasure to introduce you to Kelley Curtis of Durham First Aid Incorporated. With a team of highly trained professional instructors, Durham First Aid provides everything necessary to adhere to Ontario health and safety and the WSIB first aid standards in the workplace, including first aid courses. Kelley is a psychological first aid instructor for the Canadian Red Cross, and also works as a health promoter for the Canadian Mental Health Commission in Haliburton, Kawartha, Pine Ridge branch. The Red Cross is well known for its first aid programs, so it should come as no surprise that it provides a psychological first aid program. Look, listen, live, and link. Kelley is here to introduce us to the principles and a first look at how to apply them with a mental health crisis in the workplace. Please join me in welcoming Kelley.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm not going to try and use them.
Don't try to use the mic. Use your voice.
Use my
It's an intimate experience. Don't worry about it. That's what the reserve table
My
told
voice
me.
doesn't tend to be very loud, but you can just let me know at the back if you're able to hear me. I'm going to try and use my facilitator voice and not my normal voice, which doesn't always work out well. So thank you so much for having me in today to talk to you about psychological first aid. So psychological first aid is a program developed by the Canadian Red Cross. Basically, well, actually, let's go through the slides and then we'll just sort of go from there. So how many people here have ever taken a Red Cross first aid course? Look at the hands, I love this, okay. So when you took your first aid course, you probably would remember going through the fundamental principles. So I could actually put you to the test now and see if you remember what these all mean. Does everybody remember? No, maybe there might be a couple of people at the back of the room that really would. To help people, all right, that's a great answer. I do like it when it's a little bit more interactive, so feel free to answer me when I ask those questions. So when we look at these fundamental principles, though, these are basically what Red Cross uses as their framework for helping people within their emergencies. So it's really not that surprising, is it, that Red Cross would have come up with a psychological first aid program. So we can just flip to the next here. So when we talk about that psychological first aid program, a lot of people like to compare it to the mental health first aid program, and I did hear a little bit about that earlier, which was pretty exciting. So when we talk about the psychological first aid program, this is very much an evidence-based, research-based kind of program that has been designed in collaboration with a lot of different groups and people, the World Health Organization, for example, to basically meet the needs of people, because we do understand that people are at an all-time high for stress, for workplace stress, personal stress, all kinds of different stress, particularly over the last couple of years. This program is actually a little bit longer or older than that. So we'll move on to the next one here. So what is psychological first aid? So what do you think it is? What are your thoughts? What is psychological first aid? What is first aid? Let's step back to that one.
I guess like an emergency procedure that you would apply, and then if I'm going to go with psychological, I'm going to say it's probably more on the mental side. So
Absolutely.
Combine the two, maybe?
It's like, have you taken the program?
No, I haven't, but I'm just going to answer because I don't want to leave you hanging.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy he's sitting here. And actually, I thought you were going to answer all my questions at the back. Absolutely. When we think about first aid, we talk about first aid as being, that immediate care that we can provide for somebody until more advanced care can come along. Psychological first aid, kind of the same premise, right? That immediate care that we can provide until somebody else can come along, right? So let's move on into the next one here. I thought I would actually show you a little bit of an activity that you might do in a first aid or a psychological first aid course, simply because I think this is something that'll be really helpful in explaining to you what the program actually is. Because I know a lot of people are sitting there going, I still don't get it, I don't know what this is. So, everyone's ready for a quiz? You've been sitting here listening to a lot of great information all morning. I think it's time, right? So I was going to actually do this for you the way that I would do it in a psychological first aid course, where I'd have you running all over the room, but maybe I'll let you just stay at your tables and we'll just go with some hand raising. So this quiz is called Yes, No, and I Don't Know. So we're going to go through just a couple of questions. I won't take you through the whole program, because psychological first aid is something that I would typically deliver in a full day program. The way that we like to deliver that program, my preferred method is to do it as a blended, where you would do an online module. And there's a couple of those online modules that you could do. One is called Care for Self, and the other is called Care for Others. And these are awesome programs. These are fantastic standalone workshops or modules that you can do, even without taking the full psychological first aid course. So I really like them as an introduction to the course. So when somebody comes in to do a psychological first aid program, they know exactly what they're coming in to do. They've heard some of the terminology. They know some of the topics that we're going to be discussing, so they can be sort of prepared for that. So when we do that in that one day, full day workshop, you've already got a little bit of that information, and then you come in. And so it would be a full day. So for me to spend my 20 minutes doing that full program isn't going to really work. Timing doesn't match. So we're just going to do a yes-no activity. So I'm going to flip to the first one. So here's your question. Everyone is traumatized in an emergency to some extent. So who would say yes? Look at all those hands. Who would say no? Okay. And who would say, I don't know? Fair enough, fair enough. So then my next thing that I would do in that classroom is I would say, okay, who moved to the yes side of the room and wants to share why they would say that yes, everyone is traumatized. Would anyone want to share?
I don't know.
You're on the I don't know?
I mean, they've all experienced that, whatever that emergency is. And an emergency, I imagine there's some level of stress or anxiety that could impact everyone, because it does say to some extent.
Yeah.
So, it could be very minimal, but it's still trauma.
Absolutely. Great answer, great response. And then I had a couple of people that said no. Does anyone want to share why they said no? Yeah.
It depends on the coping skills that you have, coping mechanism, and how do you perceive
awesome.
what it could be a traumatized event for somebody, and how you personally perceive that event.
Yes.
Something that maybe for somebody it's a traumatizing event, and for you it is something that you maybe went about that before. So it is you just take steps how to perceive that event.
Awesome. What a great response as well, right? So absolutely. So a lot of the times when somebody reads that statement, everyone is traumatized in emergency to some extent. People are looking at that going, well, how do I define traumatized versus how do you define that word? What is an emergency to me? What is an emergency to you? And a lot of that actually will come from our own personal resiliency and our own personal coping strategies. And we've heard a lot of that this morning already, right? So fantastic. So those of you that did say, I don't know, maybe now you might be willing to pick a side, maybe not. It's still okay not to. And that's one of the premises of psychological first aid. There are no wrong answers because it's really all about our own perspective, right? Perfect. All right, let's move to another one here. Psychological first aid takes place only after a crisis event. This is a tough question because you don't really quite know what psychological first aid is yet. But how many people would say yes? Oh, somebody's undecided. She's like, I want to put my hand up. All right. How many people would say no? Okay. And how many people would say, I don't know, because I don't know what the program is yet? Fair enough. Okay. So psychological first aid. So who would like to share why they said yes? Oh, no, nobody's brave enough. Okay. Oh, yes.
Well, I think if you take notice, you can tell when people are not doing well and start the conversation, which I really throughout the whole day. Try to have a conversation and make it safe.
Try to have that conversation.
Share.
Good.
And it's also noticing.
Noticing. Being aware, absolutely. Being able to recognize some of those signs of stress or trauma within somebody else or within yourself. Absolutely. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Yeah.
Kind of going back to the last question as well, like piecing it down, a crisis event can mean two very different things to two very different people.
Yeah.
So it's just, again, recognizing that and being able to open up that conversation with that person and kind of seeing what they might need in that time before it turns into what others might perceive as a crisis event.
Awesome. Great response, absolutely. Yeah. Was there anybody here who said no? Yeah?
So, my view of a crisis event, if you were looking at it as like a physical health issue instead of a mental health, would be like the difference between someone, having a limb cut off versus having a cut, right? So you don't have to, my view is that you have to reach the limb came off stage before you start to engage first aid.
I think I'm going to take that analogy and use that. Is that okay? Actually, when you were speaking earlier, I was writing down some notes too of things that I'm going to steal. So I'll give credit. I'll give credit. Absolutely. So psychological first aid is one of those things when we talk about that. Oh, did you want to add to it?
Yeah, and, it's cultural too, depending on where you are. So the way that you react in the group is the way that you're going to react. So it might be after the fact when you're outside of the group and you're an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Good. When we talk about psychological first aid, and we're going to get into the whole look, listen, link to live kind of cycle here in just a moment, but when we talk about that, it is what do we do to prepare ourselves for a situation? How do we respond in the midst of a situation? How do we respond after a situation? So psychological first aid really is something that should take place all the time. And we did hear already a little bit today about like self-care and resiliency and some of that kind of stuff. This is a program that is very big on resiliency building, and we talk a lot about how do we promote resiliency. I personally do believe that we do not do a good enough job promoting resiliency within our own children. Just watching my own children as they've grown up and now watching my grandchildren, this is something that I think is really important. So psychological first aid is something that should take place all the time. And we can talk about different ways that can happen. So awesome, thank you. And maybe one more. So I just picked a few questions. And this one I thought would be really interesting, just knowing some of the topics that we're going to be discussed today. So resiliency is about bouncing back after a crisis or a disaster. Yes? How many want to say yes? How many want to say no? Does anyone want to say I don't know? Okay. I like just to make it well-rounded. You need to come to every one of my workshops.
I work for somebody else.
I do a lot of stuff virtually, so you can come to those. Absolutely. So resiliency is about bouncing back. So who wants to share why they chose their response? Because there's some people who were pretty strong about how they felt about that one. Does anyone want to share why they chose their response? Sure.
I don't think it's about bouncing back. It's about being through the crisis. So I used to work in crisis management for investment banks and business. So if I think of it from a business resiliency perspective, it wasn't about waiting for the crisis and then going, okay, and these are the steps we're going to take to bounce back. It's being resilient before. So having those tools, products, whatever it is, to not have to bounce back.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes complete sense. Thank you. Absolutely.
I feel like resiliency and bounce back shouldn't be in the same sentence because resiliency is a long-term over time, as you were saying, Kathleen, I think it is?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. You were saying it's a process that happens over time when you build tools, when you've overcome challenges. So to say that, like, that resiliency, you bounce back after a crisis, it's almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like limiting, what that resiliency looks like and what that feels like. It feels very limiting, that term, to bounce back, because it's not crisis. Resiliency is something you work on every single day, every single minute sometimes, depending what situation you're in. So it's not about, as Kathleen said, and as I said earlier in my speech, it's about getting through it.
Absolutely.
Like the only way out is through.
I like that. The only way out is through. Absolutely.
I was just thinking that when somebody has practiced to be resilient, the other person on the outside could think, oh, they're great at bouncing back, like as if the crisis didn't affect them. But it's not. It's because it's something you're
working at. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
For me, resiliency is the journey, the bounce back is the result.
Okay, that's a cool way to put that. I like that. Yeah. Awesome, thank you. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to share that sometimes I feel like the word resilient can be used to stigmatize individuals. Like if someone does respond to something that's happening to them, if they are emotional or challenging through it, sometimes you hear language like, well, they really need to work on their resiliency, right? As opposed to acknowledging that even if that individual is resilient, they still can be impacted by what's happening to them.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that's really important. We can all be impacted by what's happening, right? We will all show emotion and we will all show results of impact, right? For every situation that we do experience. So fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to go back to that one just for 1 second here. Just a couple of points I want to make on there. One of the things that I always kind of mention when we see this statement is think about Tigger and Winnie the Pooh. Tigger always bounces forward, never backwards, right? The other thing too is when you think about an experience that any incident or anything that you've experienced will change you in some way. Me coming here and speaking to you today will change me. I am not going to be exactly the same at the end of the day today that I was when I left my house this morning, right? Something today will change me. Meeting you, hearing some of the information that you've given me will have some sort of an effect or impact on me. So when we talk about bouncing backwards, and I'm always really careful on this, I work for the Canadian Mental Health Association as well. We have a fantastic program you're going to hear more about soon called BounceBack. So I'm really careful about how I frame this. It should always be moving forward. We are moving forward how we're dealing with the incidents or the situations that will arise every day for us, right? Awesome, thank you. All right, so now let's take just a brief look. I did promise that I would be shorter than my 20 minutes today to try and help to kind of catch up on some of the time that I knew we'd be losing throughout the day. So look, listen, link to live. This is a cycle that participants will learn when they come in and do that psychological first aid program. So the first part, and I'm going to just take you really, again, very briefly, just to give you an idea or a little bit of a taste of what this program is like. Because one of the first questions that I always get from people when they hear about psychological first aid is, Who's it good for? Who should take this program? Well, personally, I think everybody should be. I've done this program, I've been a part of the psychological first aid program since it actually did originate, and I want to say like, it's been 5 years now, Jay, like 6 years, something like that. I'm terrible with time. The older I get, the less time has any meaning to me whatsoever. So it's been a while. But with this program, I've done this with the general public. I've also done this in workplaces. I've done a lot of it in schools, which is a really cool place to actually do it because you can change it up a little bit for youth, kind of like the mental health first aid that was mentioned earlier. But when I do this in a workplace, as an example, sometimes it's as a result of something that has happened in the workplace. They might want to do a psychological first aid program for the staff, for the employees, because it can be really helpful in having people kind of work through whatever incident it was that occurred. But for some people, it might be just that they want to learn how to be a little bit more supportive to the people that they are working with, right? In our communities, in our workplaces, in our personal lives, in our schools, wherever it happens to be. So let's take a look at this first piece here, watching out for signs of stress within yourself or within others. So think about yourself for a moment, okay? How do you display stress? What are some of your own personal signs of stress that you might recognize? Is anyone brave enough to share that? Yes.
Lack of sleep.
Lack of sleep or any change in your sleep pattern, absolutely. And is that not something that you might recognize in another person as well, right? So it might not even always be that we recognize our own sign of stress, but we might have somebody else who can recognize it. So here's an example, personal. My oldest daughter, she's probably the only person who's brave enough to say this to me, but she says when I'm stressed, she recognizes it because I get snippy. Yeah. Now, who else would ever say that to me? But my oldest daughter, she gets away with it. So she might say I'm being snippy, and she'll say, Mom, are you okay? You're being snippy. Oh, you're right, yes, I am a little bit stressed. And then I might notice some of those own personal signs that I always notice. So my first sign of any type, whenever I'm anxious, whenever I'm experiencing any type of stress or anxiety, positive or negative stress, will be that I feel a little something in my stomach. So that might be it for me, right? But there's all these different categories that we would go through. And of course, we should always be looking for those signs of stress within ourselves or within other people, okay? And the way that we would actually go through that in a psychological first aid course is we do what's called case-based learning. Has anyone heard of that? No? So this is where I would break you up into groups in the classroom, and you would actually define a crisis event, and I would take you through that whole process. You'd make out a whole storyline, which is kind of fun. And then you get to make characters or create characters that belong to that storyline. And then every single topic we talk about after that, we apply it back to your characters. So what signs of stress do you think your character might be experiencing, right? Or you might talk about signs of grief or loss or trauma. What would your character be experiencing? This is a safe way for us to kind of go through these topics in a one-day classroom, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh, this could be like very triggering. Well, the way that we kind of help to deal with that triggering piece is, first of all, do that online piece so you know what you're coming into. But also, we apply it to the characters rather than to ourselves. I'm not going to say, how are you feeling? How do you experience trauma, for example, right? Awesome. All right, so then that's our first piece. And then listening to yourself. So what do you think that means, listening to yourself? So you've looked within yourself for those signs of stress.
Well, actioning what you've seen.
Absolutely, actioning what you've seen. That's a perfect way to frame it. Thank you. Absolutely. What are we going to do about this? Good. Okay. And there's all kinds of different things that we might do. And we will, of course, talk about self-care because it's my favorite topic in the entire world. But I don't know, I say I live a life of self-care, which sounds a little bit selfish, but it's not. So let's go to our next one. Linking is that action that you take based on what you have established, right? So you've been looking within yourself, listening so that you can action what you need to action. And now we're going to look at the linking. So we might, in a psychological first aid course, go through what do the characters need? What are their risks? So we go through all the different hierarchies and all the different pieces, but what is it that they actually need at this point? Do I need to refer you to your doctor? Because anyone who's experiencing any concerns with their mental health, as this was mentioned earlier, should always see a doctor first, right? Let's rule out some of that physical stuff and see if that's impacting your mental health. Or in this situation, maybe that person needs information about homelessness, or maybe they need information about food banks. What do they need, right? So we go through that whole linking piece. Okay, and then for our final one, an important part of this whole cycle will be that self-care. So this is where we actually, and there was a great, some great slides that I was actually like taking notes on very avidly about self-care. When is self-care good? When did it go to self-indulgence was the word that I learned today, and I really, really liked that. I liked that comparison that you did. I think that was amazing. So here's where I would actually invite each of you, and in the classroom we would do lots of activities on this piece. But who would like to share with me what they do for self-care? Anyone brave enough to tell me? Yes.
Daily meditation.
Daily meditation is fantastic. Yes. Yeah.
Like garden.
Garden. Absolutely. Getting outside, getting your hands dirty, right into it. Yeah.
Journaling.
Journaling. I try so hard to journal and I'm so bad at it. I'm very poor at it.
I do a gratitude assessment.
Okay.
That's 3 things every day at least, 3 to 5.
Yeah, that is something that I recommend, like in a lot of the workshops that I do, I always recommend that piece. And I started out with even, because you know, sometimes people say, I don't know how to do self-care. I've never done self-care. So here's a really simple one. Start out in the morning with a couple of goals. One is easily attainable, and the other one is maybe something you're working on. Like maybe it's, I'm gonna make my bed. Parents always thank me when I do that with high school students. And maybe the other one is, I'm gonna work on my road rage and be a little bit nicer to other people when I'm driving my car, and not talk to them all quite so much, right? And then at the end of the day, when I go back and I look at that gratitude piece, what can I tie that in? How can I tie it in? I did a fantastic job making my bed this morning. And you know what? I listened to my audiobook even when I got stuck in traffic, and it took me an hour and a half to get here this morning. So I think I did okay with the road rage. I'm not sure that any of those other drivers on the road even knew that I was upset with them. So that's a good thing, right? So when we talk about self-care, what is it that we're going to be doing, right? How do we all promote self-care? And typically we would end our day of a psychological first aid course with everybody actually telling me what they're going to do for self-care, because we all know that if we actually make a verbal commitment or a written commitment, we're more likely to follow through with it. So that's a lot about what our psychological first aid program is about. And we do end it with that whole piece on self-care. So that is what our psychological first aid program is about. Does everyone now know what psychological first aid is?
Yes.
Yes, and you can like contact Durham First Aid to take the course. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelley. That was great. I actually took a mental health first aid course last year. It was on Zoom, but it's well worthwhile, and it's good. They've actually want me to talk to other co-workers about it as well. And I agree with you. Everyone should take it, not necessarily just a us with one person, but at least somebody should at your organization. And then I remember the course I took. Those videos were great. They were actors, and they would have a situation. You know, somebody's, I guess, freaking out or something. Then you had a neighbor come over doing what you shouldn't do, and then a neighbor coming over doing what you should do. And it was so obvious, the differences, but I think most people do a combination of both. And so it's a great learning experience just to identify, you know, changes in people. So it's well worth, you know, getting certified. And I didn't know about the psychological first aid program, and I know you could probably take it with CPR as well and mental health. Like you can combine a lot of things as well. It sounds like resiliency will be another one. My daughter's actually a teacher, and I know if you're a teacher educated in the last few years, that's a big topic now. It never was many years ago. Never even heard of it, but it is with them. So thank you again, Kelley. So today, I mean, so far we're very pleased with the presentations that we went through, and again, we'll remind everybody about the QR code that you can find out, you can see all these presentations, or you can actually go to Jessica or Chris if you want the presentation sent to you. So that's great. And then our final presentation will be just as exciting. So it's a great pleasure to introduce to you Alec King, Communications Lead at Canadian Mental Health Association Durham. CMHA is a national organization with 330 community locations that promotes mental health and supports people recovering from mental illness. CMHA Durham is an integrated community mental health and primary care hub that has been providing mental health services to Durham region for over 60 years. CMHA has a wealth of resources, but What we specifically asked them to address in this forum is the wealth of online supports to help people struggling with mental health. How do we sort through good programs from harmful ones? Well, it came as no surprise that CMHA has developed a program that has proven to be effective and helpful. Please join me in welcoming Alec to who will introduce us to the BounceBack program.
Hello. Hi, I'm Alec King. I'm with CMHA Durham, and I'm here to talk about BounceBack. I know we're running a little close on time, so I'll try and keep it kind of tight. So BounceBack is a free CBT-based skill building program that is self-directed and available online and through telephone coaching for individuals. So maybe we won't talk too much about its development, but basically in 2015 it was brought to Ontario by CMHA York and South Simcoe, and then it was expanded in 2017 to more of Ontario, and then in April 2020, in response to the pandemic, it was brought to the province as a whole. It's also now available across the entire country, so it's a service that's available for free to everybody. So there are two different kinds of services you get with BounceBack. There is the telephone coaching and workbooks, which require a referral or that you include your primary care provider when you make the connection, or BounceBack Today online videos, which are completely accessible with no referrals and just people can get there immediately. So we're going to talk about the telephone coaching and workbooks first. So the reason that you need access to connect with a primary care provider is because you're talking with someone who's going to be constantly assessing and checking in and working with you, and they want to be able to, if there's an issue or a crisis or if there's any concern about your safety or someone else's safety, that they're able to talk to their primary care provider to keep everyone protected. But the coaches that you're going to be talking to are extensively trained in the BounceBack program, and they're all overseen by clinical psychologists. They work through 20 different notebooks, and they kind of select the notebooks that work best for you and what your issues may be, what you want to work on. And here's an example of some of the workbooks that you might have. They have understanding low mood and depression, using exercise to how to boost how you feel, because that's one of those things that we see a lot of, like, you know, you should exercise, but how exactly does that work for each individual, and how does that develop something that actually helps people with their mood? There's also, for people who might found 20 workbooks and the selection of them provided to them a bit overwhelming, there's shorter form workbooks that people can work through as well. And they may be a bit more focused directly on a certain topic that people might want to work on. Then after the 12 workbooks, there's 9 youth-aimed workbooks that are for people in the 15 to 18-year-old range. So the people in that age range will usually be offered both workbooks, both the younger version and the older one, just to see which one they're more comfortable with. And then based on what they prefer, that'll be that's what they'll work with their telephone coach. So the telephone coaches, the coaches aren't counselors, but they're trained and educated in motivational coaching. It's very much like you would think of a personal trainer at the gym. It's someone who is working you through the program, helping you, motivating you, talking you through things, and making sure that you're safe while you're going through all of these things as well. They assist with skill development, provide motivation, and they monitor people's progress. They are all overseen by clinical psychologists, and they assess and monitor people for the risk of harming themselves or other people every day. On every call that they make. And the primary care provider still remains responsible for the clinical care of the individual involved. So this is what a typical kind of BounceBack journey looks like. If someone is going for telephone coaching with BounceBack, once they make the connection, they're usually connected with a coach within 3 to 5 days of them making that first support, which is wonderful that it comes through that quickly. Then after that, they do they make the connection, then we establish eligibility. Then coaching can kind of start going through the workbooks, 15 and 20-minute sessions. After that, it goes through more coaching. If they feel like it's going really well, they can close the contact, but they're always able to come back. You have the further support for help reinforce skills with support. People can at any time pause the program if they're finding that they need to take a break, if they're overwhelmed, if their life is preventing them from continuing with BounceBack, and they can pause for up to 6 months without having to re-refer. After the 6 months, they can immediately re-refer and their case just reopens. So it's not a matter of there being any kind of closed door. If people stop for some reason, they can come back in right away. The typical period of time that someone spends working on the telephone coaching for the BounceBack program is around 3 to 6 months. Right, and then there's the BounceBack online videos, which has absolutely no barrier to entry. People don't need to provide any kind of information at all. You just simply connect online and go through a series of videos at your own pace self-guided by yourself, and it's actually a really great opportunity for people who might be unsure about going through with the telephone coaching to get their kind of feet wet and see what the program offers and the services that they have. So these are video versions of the workbooks that are provided to people. And sorry, talking about the workbooks, I'm kind of blazing through things, but the workbooks, when they're sent to people, they're mailed to your home and they're actually sent in discrete packaging. So there's nothing that says like BounceBack in giant colors on it or anything like that. It's a very simple kind of package that you receive. So the big question around BounceBack is, now that we know what it is, does it work? And the evidence that we found is that yes, it really, really does. People who went through the telephone support program report that they feel their depression is decreased by 43% and their anxiety is decreased by 43% as well. So people feel significantly better going through the BounceBack program. And we've also seen reports that people feel better physically as well, that kind of changed their kind of mental outlook, and their feeling can actually help other ailments as well, or sorry, other issues as well. So how to refer for BounceBack, won't get too much into this because right now really everyone can self-refer. So if you're a professional who's looking to refer someone to the BounceBack program, there's a lot of different conditions that you might need to look at for that. You can do that on the website. People can't be referred from crisis services or from emergency rooms. But other than that, if you are an individual who wants to get involved with BounceBack, please just go online. So participant stories. So this is looking at kind of, anonymized information of people who have actually gone through the BounceBack program. So this is Danielle, who's a 17-year-old student in her final year of high school. She's having a lot of anxiety, and she feels intimidated when she's in situations where she should be assertive, but she wants to avoid conflict with her peers. So she's insecure, and she's not sure about going to university in the fall. So she took part in the BounceBack program, and they helped her learn how to face situations and conversations that made her feel uncomfortable. They broke down her fears to kind of look at tackling the issues one at a time. They help her notice unhelpful thinking patterns that were influencing her relationship with her peers, and help her overcome her fear of speaking over the phone with people she's unfamiliar with in situations where she must talk about herself. So the next participant is Kyle. He's a 54-year-old who lives in the GTA. He was a marketing consultant for 30 years, and now he's on unemployment insurance due to leave of absence. He was in a serious car accident, and he has chronic pain. And he's feeling low, depressed, and overwhelmed, which is very frequent for people who are dealing with traumatic incidents and chronic pain and being away from work. He is experiencing a lot of unhelpful thoughts about his situation and his accomplishments. So they broke down practical problems, which mainly a lot of them around money and his concerns with finding different solutions for how he was going to provide for his family. They kind of slowly incorporate helpful activities that he enjoys doing. He's not able to play soccer anymore, but now he can kind of participate by watching soccer, eventually going out to seeing games in person, that kind of thing. And they help him target extreme and unhelpful thoughts that were preventing him from seeing how well he's actually doing, how well he's coping with the situation that he's in. So here's some frequently asked questions about the BounceBack program. So can someone who is not a primary care provider assist a potential participant in filling out the referral form? And the answer is yes. Anyone can help someone get connected with the BounceBack program. It can be a counselor at a college or university or a social worker or a case manager. The most important information is that if it's the telephone support, they do need to include the name of their primary care provider. Is it a counseling program? And like we said before, it's not. The coaches aren't counselors. It is very much like just someone trying to help and motivate you and help you go through the workbooks. It can be much more helpful to have someone who you know that you're going to be connecting with to talk about these things rather than going through the videos online. I think anyone knows when you go into one of those situations where you're dealing with something that self-guided, sometimes that motivation is really helpful when you have someone kind of pushing you along. And that's what's great about having the telephone coaches for people. How does it assess and manage the risk of participants? Every coach begins the session with a mood questionnaire, and they talk about how people are doing. Like I mentioned before, all of the coaches have access to a clinical psychologist, so if there's issues or if they have concerns, they're able to bring that up, and they can talk about that and address that with clients to make sure that everyone's safe. And how do people access the participants access the BounceBack workbooks? And like I said, you can either get soft copies emailed to you, or you can have them mailed to you directly in discrete packaging. So. Oh, and BounceBack and the language it's available in is actually great because this slide's already out of date. They continuously add new languages that you can get BounceBack in, and it is fantastic. So there's a very real possibility that if there's any language you're looking at, you will be able to get access to it, which is fantastic. The hours of service, these are only for the telephone coaching, the availability for that. But for people who are looking to access things online, have the workbook sent to them, things like that, that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those are always available for people. And this is how you would get in contact with BounceBack. So you can go to bouncebackontario.ca on the website for more information. Like I mentioned before, it's a great way just to, you can check out the videos if you're looking for just to get your feet wet and get connected with BounceBack and see what it has to offer. And then maybe after that, move on to telephone coaching. Great.
Thank you, Alec. Congratulations to the CMHA for creating the BounceBack program. That's great. So just a quick recap, because I know we all want to get back to work. Don't laugh too much. Onika, thank you again for your bravery and your openness about your journey. It's always, really nice to just to hear somebody, go through a journey and understand as best as we can on what you've went through and continue to, progress, which is great to hear. So we've heard a lot of great things today. Hopefully we share this with our colleagues, and a lot of great information there. And I will definitely share this. And thank you to all of our presenters this morning. And we are blessed to have made such an incredible contributions to mental health in our community. So we have closing words, Talia.
I know, it's you.
Are we using the mic? Not using the mic?
Can you project your voice?
I don't know. Wow. What a great morning, right? So I know Bill said about going back to work, but honestly, I feel like ready to face the world. Thanks to all the speakers today. I definitely was taking notes. I learned a lot, and I'll likely be following up with some of you later via email. So thanks to all of you, and thanks to our sponsors, Bell and OLG and 369 Global Inc. Without you guys, we couldn't have made today happen. And what a wonderful day, the venue, the sugar. So also special thanks to Express Employment Professionals. The centerpieces, your birthday. If it's the closest to today, you win. So I win because my birthday's in 2 weeks. So please take it home. Figure out who's closest to it. What is the date today? Today is the 10th.
I'm not even part of this. This is
June 8th. Whoever's closest to June 8th. Are we good? Everybody figure it out?
I think so.
Okay, everyone. So our next event is actually going to be networking, location to be determined, sponsored by Casino Ajax and Pickering Casino Resort, and that is on June 23rd, the day after my birthday, so now you can't forget it. If you're leaving, please leave your lanyard for your name tag at the front. Any of the speakers, could you hang back a minute? We'd like to take some photos. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I feel empowered, I feel ready to face the day, and I wish you all a successful day in business.
Thank you.